All right, so we will start letting attendees join for the next minute or so, and I'll just keep my eye and let you guys know when it's time to begin.
Oh, wow.
All right, I see it, people filling in now. We'll give it another minute and then go ahead and get started.
He actually called him up.
All right, I'm sure people will continue to join over the first few minutes or so. I see them filling in now, but I want to go ahead and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our CMFO Roundtable today. We appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning. We have 3 great topics to cover and some great presenters to give you that information. So we'll let people fill in over the first few minutes, but I'll go ahead and pass it over to Bud, John, when you see that number get to a point where you're ready to get started.
Okay, we'll give it another minute or two.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Okay. Got Norman. There you go.
Yeah, same.
Hey, Laura.
All right, it seems to have leveled off a bit. I'm sure people will continue filling in over the first few minutes or so.
Okay.
Katie, your volume is very low. I can hear everyone, but I'm having difficulty hearing you.
All right, let me adjust my setting. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll get started. I want to thank everyone for attending today, our presenters and all of the attendees. This is the first CMFO roundtable that we're doing since the unfortunate death of Bill Homa. Bill was an integral part of our roundtables. He was always eager to ask his questions, give his opinions, thoughts on items. I worked with Bill for a number of years, respected the hell out of him, liked him a lot, thought he was awesome, great guy, and he will be missed. Jon Rheinhardt, I don't know if you want to say anything. I know you were close with Bill.
He definitely will be missed. Bill's the reason I started teaching for Rutgers. Called me up one day, said, "Hey, let's go have dinner." Shows up with his banker's box full of papers, transparencies, everything, and said, "Hey, here's what you're going to start doing." But he was always that kind of guy, always there for everybody, always positive. So yes, he definitely will be missed.
Like Bill a lot. He probably had the messiest office I've ever seen, but he knew where everything was.
Poor Angela, she's still got all that in the basement.
Okay, so again, I want to thank everyone for coming. I'm going to give a quick bio of for our first session, we're doing Comptroller's Office with Sean Canning and Roy Rigatano. Sean Canning is currently the QPA or QPA consultant for 41 municipalities, joint insurance funds, health insurance funds, and has been the QPA of record or consultant for 3 counties. Prior to establishing the Canning Group, Sean was the business administrator in the Borough of Lincoln Park and the Township of Mount Olive. Sean was the chief of police in the Borough of Lincoln Park from 2004 through 2010, and a police officer of progressively ascending ranks from 1985 to 2004. All that being said, Sean is a close personal friend of Jon Rheinhardt, smokes too many cigars, and does not fish enough.
That's Sean. So the next person we have that's going to be presenting today is Roy Rigatano. Roy is a certified municipal finance officer, certified county finance officer, certified tax collector. So you could say that he's certifiable. He's also a qualified purchasing agent. Roy holds a BA in biochemistry, so you wonder why the heck he got into finance. Also holds an MBA in finance and marketing from Fairleigh Dickinson University. Roy actually started off in the Bergen County Treasury Office, so he was there much earlier than I was. He also has an MBA in finance. I'm sorry, I'm going backwards. He is also in the Borough of Elmwood Park, full-time, part-time as CFO in Palisades Park and Rochelle Park, and before that, Garfield, until recently. He has been an adjunct professor at Fairleigh Dickinson University, teaching 500-level courses towards the MBA program. He has been a volunteer firefighter since 1976, and he's been a member of the executive board of GFOA since 2003. That's Roy.
Good morning, everyone. So I have the task of talking a little bit about the Office of the State Comptroller, favorite group of all of ours. Couple facts that I found out about the State Comptroller's Office, and then we'll go into my presentation. It's going to be basically a question answer type of seminar I'm doing. I'm going to be eliciting some questions from the audience as well. But a couple facts about the OSC, which is the Office of State Comptroller. They were established in 2008, so it's relatively a new department. It was basically delegated through the governor's office. The mission of the office was to basically review all aspects of government expenditures. Obviously, if there was any type of corruption, fraud. This is what these 140 employees are supposed to be doing. In 2010, the Office of the Inspector General was consolidated and everybody was lumped into the Office of the State Comptroller's Office. One of the issues that many of us seem to have with the Office of State Comptroller, and we're talking only now in the finance aspects of their duties and responsibilities. They are very influential as far as investigative of Medicare fraud. They have like 4 different mission statements. For us, it's a little more widespread. But as I present, you're going to see 60, 70 towns that they have been through, years of investigative checking every aspect to municipal finance, specifically in these 60 towns. In the Borough of Palisades Park, we were one of the first to be chastised for not following various rules and regulations. And I'll go into the report a little bit. But there seems to be a little bit of a conflict between the RMA, the CFO, the borough attorneys, the mayor and councils, the policy handbooks through the mail and JIF, contractual negotiated agreements, and the controller's reports and their investigative findings. One of the questions I asked when this all started is, in 2010, for everybody, May 21st, 2010 was the effective date in which, from that moment forward, the CFOs, administrators, you cannot pay sick pay whatsoever until upon retirement. The problem is with the reports that I read and what I see now today, if you were hired prior to May 21st, 2010, we have taken the position, right or wrong, that we pay sick pay for those who are have it in their contracts, labor agreements, and we still get conflicts with the controller's office concerning why are you paying sick pay? And we always say because it was prior to May 21st, 2010. So what I've done is I've reviewed some of the reports, and there's voluminous reports out there about sick pay. And one of the quotes in the controller's report states that the provision applies only to officers and employees who commence service with the political subdivision, which would be municipalities, townships, all 5 types of government. And that becomes effective May 21st, 2010. So there was also, my very first question to the audience, there was a PERC ruling a year ago that basically vindicated or suggested that if you were hired prior to 2010, you're entitled to that sick pay. Of course, it would be 1 year, whatever it may be, according to the contract. But there was a PERC ruling that basically challenged, if you will, the rulings by some of the reports that went out in reference to sick pay. So if anyone has anything on PERC, because that was challenged and PERC ruled from what I gather. In the actual documents, there were some of the statistics. A news from the state control. This was also posted September 28th, 2023. And in the middle, it's again, it brings out by state law, all employees hired after May 2010 cannot receive more than $15,000 of unused sick leave. Employees can only receive that $15,000 upon retirement, where not when they resign, change jobs, or the annual payout. Employees also cannot carry over more than a year's worth of vacation time. The vacation time seems to be upheld by most, if not all, of the municipalities that have been challenged by the OSC. It's always been this sick leave issues. Are there any questions so far? So,
Nothing yet. Nope.
Okay, so going into the details, because we seem to have been the poster boy, we were one of the first to be hammered away with a 60-page report about our fiscal finances in the borough of Palisades Park. Some of the actions, by the way, the report was also reviewed by a very well-known law firm, and they too had some questions about some of the writings. But let me make myself also clear. We were also in violation as per the OSC on some of the violations. And unfortunately, where some of the towns have been listed today as not complying with these rulings, the Borough of Palisades Park did, in fact, in writing, by resolution, through attorneys, review the entire report, all 60 pages, and we took those corrective actions. One of the, so I'm going to go through very quickly some of the findings that are absolutely in your reports. I read the different people on this cast roundtable, so you're involved too. So let me just go through what we did and how we were able to comply. So one of the issues had to do again with the actual employees handbook. And it basically said here that the borough does not enforce the date restriction in which if you were hired prior to 2010, you were entitled to the sick pay. Well, we did pay unfortunately, after 2010, some employees, but not in the tune of $115,000, $130,000. That is not true either. It was much less. However, we were in violation. So what we did, the remedy was the borough has stopped sick payouts for anyone hired after the May 2010, and it's in our 2021 handbook. You may want to, for those on here, the CFOs, make sure you update your handbooks to reflect what I just said. Again, we're the poster boy, and if you notice with all the reports, we were in compliance. So that's why you don't see us on this infamous 58 town no list.
Hey, Roy, before you move
yep.
on, I think it's important to note that the Comptroller's office has no problem blasting these issues through the media and attacking essentially these towns or the entities that are reviewing, and there's no retraction. And as you heard from Roy, they found that they were right in what they had done. It's also interesting to note that Roy's Town did not make it to the final report that they issued.
Right, and that's also very, very disturbing. Whereas the RMAs out there, you give us time to correct. We're all professionals in this business. We also are the very first. If we hear of corruption, fraud, stealing, we basically manage our own. We hear something, we drop the dime. We're not in the business of pilferage, theft by deception. And that seems to be, as John just said, gotcha. And that's one of the biggest issues I have with the OSC. Give us some time to correct. Don't blast us after a 3-year investigation. You give us 2 days to review a draft. And before we even answer it, it's in the press. It was in the press, the entire 60-page. We didn't even see or have comments on it. So John, again, as usual, he's right on that aspect. So on the borough's sick leave policy and annual payouts, they say we were wasteful, we were inefficient, we were terrible. Well, it turns out many of those were wrong. And how are they wrong? So you CFOs, listen up, because this is how we found the errors. So we had employees who were hired prior to 2010, but that did not appear on the IROC, the report of contributions. And the reason they did not appear on the IROC is they were part-time employees going to school, going to college, working for the borough. According to the IRS regulations, as we all know, are you an employee or are you a vendor? Well, in this case, we consider them to be part-time employees. So they were hired prior to 2010. When the office looked at the IROC and they did, quote, their due diligence, I was never questioned about any of this. It just appeared in a report after it was blasted in the media. So I never had any time to look at this. And quite honestly, it was quite devastating. I take my job, as everyone else does, to heart. That's why we hired a law firm to review the report. And one of the aspects of the report is some of the people who they said were not entitled to pay, indeed were. So those hundreds of thousands of dollars that we were corrupt in paying bad pay to our wonderful employees, obviously some of it was in fact wrong on the controller's report. Longevity. We did have contracts in that we had longevity. This was one where we did update as per the controller's report, and we reflected, and one of the remedies is prior employee contracts have already stopped longevity after January 1st, 2017. The borough has completely eliminated longevity pay and capped terminal pay for some employees. So we were in compliance. That's why we're not on that infamous list today. One of the aspects that they really hammered us on was the borough's fuel purchases are subject to waste, fraud, and abuse. Borough leaders do not know who used the fuel, what vehicles were used to fill up, et cetera, et cetera. We were sloppy, but I don't think we had the general public criminals going to our yards and filling up the gas tanks, but we couldn't prove it. So now we set up a gas card system. We have cameras now, and we monitor that much more closely. The monthly car allowances. So we have employees who are getting a car allowance. Some of our employees did not live in town. Unfortunately, even though they responded, if there was some type of aspect of failure of the infrastructure of the borough, our employees, we gave them a set amount of money for gas. Controller said we couldn't do that, so we stopped that. And everything that I'm saying today is in resolutions, 15 different resolutions, all in reference to the report we have passed by unanimous decision by the mayor and councils going back to 2021 through today. So we are definitely trying to comply with the OSC and their findings. Again, we go back though, the RMAs, the attorneys, the borough attorneys, and we have multiple. We just question, well, why didn't you give us time to correct some of these aspects instead of doing a 3-year investigation and then gotcha in a report released to the public before we even had say?
Everybody, let me interrupt for just 1 second.
Yep.
Just want to remind everybody, if you have questions, to post them through the chat, and then we'll respond to them as soon as they get posted.
Right, and also we want to hear their experiences too, if they had some work with the controller's office.
So one of the aspects to the report, they really hammered me as the CFO, saying I was really bad, I wasn't good, I wasn't doing my job, it was a no-show job. Let me just explain. One of the aspects that they said is that my staff used a stamp to stamp purchase orders. And although it is true that they didn't do it every day, and they didn't do it voluminously. There were some, and unfortunately those some, whether it be 10 or 20 out of 1,200 purchase orders, that I did not go back and write over the stamp. So the remedy for that is I took the stamp and I threw it away. There is no rubber stamp in the borough of Palisades Park. Everything is done handwritten by me 3 days a week. They also challenged 10 hours a week, where I mean, I'm part-time. And for you people who have multiple towns, be careful. And I say that because back in 1996, for those who were employed, we were encouraged, we, the CFOs, the collectors, the clerks, all statutory employees, DLGS wanted us, and God rest her soul, Judy Tripodi was one of them, said, you know what? You got the time, save the borough some money. Obviously you can't get double health benefits, do multiple towns. And in return, you could stack, you can make money on your pension. We were encouraged to do this, to save money to the taxpayers. Today, it's a no-no. You really should not be doing any more than one town, as per some of the different articles that I have read. Let me see some more here. Sales tax. Again, we got caught. No doubt about it. At the League of Municipalities, we paid sales tax on some of the rooms, and we didn't pick it up. In a tune of about $30 to $50. They hammered the living hell out of us for paying sales tax. So my staff, myself, we are now more cautious when we get the invoice from the hotels. And that's basically what it was. It was basically sales tax on the hotels, because most of the vendors, as you all know, will not put that sales tax on there. And if it does, it's missed. It's de minimis, but we missed it. Purchase orders. Be careful with the purchase orders. Purchase orders will not be paid until all signatures are received. What was happening is we were sending out the purchase orders in error, wrongly. OSC was right. We were basically paying before we got the vendor signature back. We have basically stopped that. in its entirety. Credit cards. We did have credit cards. There's no abuse. There was no fraud, but they said, you know what? No credit cards, purchase orders only. Procurement cards, the infamous procurement cards for all you QPA guys out there. No good. We use purchase orders and only purchase orders for payment. We do have emergencies every so often. The BA will every so often, I'm talking maybe 2-3 times a year, if that, where we will pay on his credit card something that had to be paid right away, whatever it may be. Well, now we make sure that the BA, myself, and at times, if necessary, we'll do a resolution also for that payment. It'll be on the claims list, so that we don't have the issues of credit cards. Procurement cards are great, but they're a gray area still to this day. And we're very cautious on that as well. You CFOs have multiple towns. Be cautious, be careful. I was able to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt, because I actually had law enforcement of other agencies, because I was so disturbed, telling me I was not at my job, I was there rarely, that I actually had the cameras, affidavits where I was there at least 10 hours a week. My employment contract, which I have none, I was hired approximately 1995 in the borough. After 4 years, I was tenured. So there were no contracts to this day. I'm only on a salary ordinance, no contract. I'm an at-will employee. OSC did not like my statements on that, but that was the truth. The work got done, right, wrong, or indifferent from 1995 forward. The 10 hours a week was something that I offered to the Comptroller's office. They interpreted it as, you're really there. Well, that's interpretation. And every time there's an interpretation with us CFOs out in the state of New Jersey, it seems as though they're just waiting to get you. The employee's handbook has become quite a official document that needs to be updated. As you know, the FAST questionnaire had some questions in reference to that as well. It's really important that the CFO and the administrators read that handbook in its entirety, update it every year, because that really keeps the administration in check and the employees in check. Do everything according to that handbook. Sick, vacation, longevity, if you have it. Follow all those procedures.
Roy, there is one question that just popped up into the box there.
Yep.
An attendee has said, we passed a resolution to not require claimant's signature on the PO for certain purchases such as state, DEP, small or local purchases. Is this a problem?
No, not at all. In fact, everyone on this cast really should do that resolution at the beginning of the year. It's a great resolution. If you can get that, and I don't know how you decipher it to those on this roundtable, great resolution, definitely should do it.
That was the change in the administrative code a couple of years ago to allow us to eliminate the need for that vendor certification. So as long as you create a policy, or if you want to do a resolution annually, that is permissible.
So one of the other aspects that really kept me personally out of hot water, everything that was done in the borough was done by resolution. Bill Homer, just so you all know, I was one of his first classes back in 1991 when he started teaching. Every license that I got was through taking the state exams. I was no grandfathered in. And one of the real good keys that Bill taught me, I share with everyone on this cast, if you are going to do anything other than pay a bill that is not on a bill's claims list, do a resolution. I have resolutions for everything that we do, even more so today. What resolutions do is it basically vindicates the CFO of wrongdoing, except of course with fraud. But by doing these resolutions, what they do is they basically give notice to the world, to New Jersey residents, to your town. Hey, we're doing X, Y, and Z, and we're disclosing it to the general public so that if there's an issue, bring it up at the council meeting, Oprah it, do whatever. But again, because everything that we do, I do, in question, I do a resolution. It just covers everything if there's a gray area.
So we
Roy,
do
there
have
was
one
a-
more question that popped up. The
Yeah.
question is, if an employee resigns from their position, do they lose any accumulated sick time? I think the answer there is it depends upon your collective bargaining agreements, your local policies, but according to that new rule on sick time payout, if you resign, that is not a triggering event. It's only upon retirement that you should be getting paid out.
Absolutely. And if you're hired after May 2010, we do not pay sick pay unless upon retirement. And let me say this now about retirements. So we actually have, when we have and most of the time it's police officers who are retiring. The PERS people basically have retired already. So most of our retirees are police officers. So what we do with all retirees, by the way, not just police, we actually do a resolution, and that resolution absolutely gives the actual amount of sick days, time, the actual contract. We actually photocopy the contract in which we're making the payment to that employee, and we attach it to the resolution. Before I move forward with the resolution, the BA and the RMA review the computations. What that does is that gives notice to the world by resolution, we're paying that public employee upon retirement according to the handbook, the CNA, whatever it may be, according to law. That just jolted my mind to talk about CNA. I was severely ridiculed by the investigators when I spoke about I paid everyone through a CNA, contractual negotiated agreement. Now, I remember back in 2010 at the League of Municipalities in November, it was the very last class, and they were talking about sick and vacation payouts, the new law that was promulgated, if you will, in May. So they spoke about this in November. And one of the questions that was posed is, if you have a CNA already in process, what happens? I can't tell you who it was, but they were on the dais. And the quote was, CNA will always remain in effect over policy, state policy and procedures in reference to collective bargaining agreements. So that was thrown out of the table in 2010 right away. I also don't recall, and this is a good one for you, John. You're still young and you still have a memory. Has there been an LFN ever issued in reference to sick pay, other than the infamous Chapter 78, where I have volumes of LFNs, but I don't remember seeing sick pay issued to the CFOs on this? You got that, John?
No, I don't think I've ever seen one either.
And that was one of the biggest controversies that we had, because they kept saying, we're not doing our jobs, we're not doing this, we're not doing that. And we're specifically with the borough of Palisades Park's report. Like I said, we thought we were in compliance. Any other questions at this time for me? Because Sean, you're going to go up now.
None at this
Hey.
point, no.
I'm just gonna jump in and do our first poll while we have a break here, if it's all right. So the first polling question is, when was the office of the state comptroller established? I don't know if we touched on this, but maybe you guys know, 2000, 2004, 2006, 2008. If you have any problem answering, feel free to just send me an email, and then I'll share the results in about 30 seconds. Right, great. We got a mixed bag here. Looks like 2008 though. Is that the right answer?
Yes.
Perfect. Great, thank you. All right, Sean, I think we're all set with no questions if you're ready to go ahead.
Excellent. Thank you, Katie. Good morning, everybody. So I want to touch on dealing with the comptrollers from the reporting aspect, and like Roy has said, they certainly are a bag of fun. I've dealt with them a real lot over the years, and I've had some good experiences, and I've had some downright bad ones with them. Just really at loggerheads on certain issues. So I want to touch just kind of upon a best practice of how to kind of navigate the swamp on your large procurements, and every one of us have them, from your capital improvement projects to whatnot. So dealing with the comptrollers, there's generally two ways on the procurement side that we're going to deal with them, and unless you're doing COVID-19 recovery funds or Superstorm Sandy still recovery, they have their own reporting aspects which you may have to delve into, but usually it's going to be the excess of 2.5 million and the excess of 12.5. And with the cost of everything going up the last couple of years, it's just been more and more the reporting. I know they upped their numbers from 2 million and 10 million respectively to where they are now, but I find myself reporting and dealing with them just a lot more, especially in the last 24 months. So I want to touch upon a couple of the rules of how we deal with them, and kind of your own best practices of how to navigate this. So I want to deal with the 12.5 million or more, and that's more projects than you probably realize. The pre-advertisement notification, and this is just off their website, but it's no later than 30 days before your advertisement that you have to submit that $12.5 million, your bid and all the supporting documents on that, whether it's a resolution of authorization or whatnot. The biggest thing, as I say with all my clients, I do training, purchasing probably about 2 or 3 times a year for everybody, and I tell everybody from the smallest purchases to the largest, plan your purchases, and usually you're going to deal with the 12.5 million, with engineers or architects, and I like them. I like working with them, but they don't have a full appreciation of sometimes the time cycle that a municipality has to go through, and especially with the comptrollers, they're very, very much in a rush to get this project or packet out in the street. That 30 days, the minimum 30 days, don't count on that. Now the statutes say that if they don't respond within those 30 days, that it's deemed approved. I've never seen that happen. They will respond, and if it's really some item, they're gonna nitpick, and you're gonna go back and forth for quite some time. In fact, I have a kind of a famous personal story that Jon and I and some others on the forum I've shared from back in spring, where they still never approved it, and we just went a different direction on that. But more on that later. So that's your pre-approvals, your post-award notifications. It's the same as with the 2.5 million. Within 20 business days after the award of the contract, you have to get that post-award notification down there. So let me jump into a couple things here on both of these. And one last point, even if you get the initial pre-advertisement approval from the comptrollers, make sure you dot your I's and cross your T's, especially in post-advertisement requirements. And most of them are found in your EUS or your comp contracts. And make sure that you dot your I's and cross your T's. So into pre-advertisement notification, make sure your projects are planned out well ahead of time. I have one going on now with one of my towns, and it looks like it might be upwards of a $35 million construction cost. So I've already reached out to the architect, and the front ends on them aren't always up to what they should be. So I want to make sure that they're aware of the timeline. We're going to work together and really make sure this thing is planned out well, and not just on packet going here. Notify them we're going out in 30 days. It's probably not going to happen. One thing I find over and over and over is identify your aggregation costs. The usual suspects on this are your third-party administrator procurements. Again, it's not a 1 year. If you're doing a 3-year TPA and it's under an EUS, that aggregate cost is if it's a larger organization, is going to be pushing possibly 12.5 million or more, or certainly 2.5 million. So make sure you identify your total cost of the contract. That's going to trigger it. All your professionals should really be on the same page ahead of time on your large procurements, your large projects, CFOs, QPAs, administrators, especially engineers and architects. The CFOs, and that's the primary audience here, and some administrators are certainly up on this. I love working with all my towns that I work for, and the CFOs. Everybody's really professional and really good. So that's normally not an issue. The engineers and architects, I enjoy working with them as well as professionals. But the one thing I do find is that they're what they call the front end usually isn't up to speed at all on the local public's contract law, and there's just a wave every year. It seems to be more and more the items have to be thrown into the front end. And I was just dealing with this morning on the it's a relatively new law from 2021. It has to do with the 10% or more prevailing wage issue. So that's another form that has to be it doesn't have to necessarily be in your bid packet, but before resolution, we have to have that signed by a vendor. And if it's a large procurement, then you can report to the comptrollers, make sure you're up on that. And there's also some contract wording that recently came out in that law that's mandatory with your prevailing wage that has to be in your contract and your specifications. I'll finish up on a slide, and I see there's a question. So again, work with your engineers and architects. The OSC can be extremely difficult for projects such as this, and they will hold up your projects. And they're not going to care about your time frame. It's not their time frame. John, did you want me to jump into that question, or?
Yeah, sure. I'll read the question out so everybody can see it or hear it. If you had a project that was 2.3 million under the OSC notice threshold and have a large change order later on for the same project that pushes you over the 2.5 million, do you need to notify OSC at that point, or is it on the initial contract only?
No, I'd say it's total contract cost. I think that's I've been in that situation, and I've always kind of erred on the side of if it's over 2.5 total contract. They're going to want to know about it, and I notify. Pre-advertisement notification, again, you have to have this submittal at the latest 30 days before advertisement. Due to their history of not being totally cooperative, the earlier the better. And again, post-award notification within 20 business days. So this is the 12.5 million or more projects, and it's very similar to the lower ones except for the pre-approval. So for the window ones, the 2.5 million, but less than 12.5 million. Again, that was a great question. Anything that's valued at 2.5 million or more, even with change orders, and that's something really be aware of. Change orders are another one of those areas. They kind of drive me nuts a little bit because it's kind of the old, that's how it's always been done. But I find, a lot of times the change orders have their own process that you have to adhere to in the administrative code. I think it's at 5:30. Make sure you adhere to that, because a lot of times, again, the engineers and architects, and I'm not bashing them, they're very good professionals. I enjoy working with them, but a lot of times they treat it as a fait accompli that, well, right, we're wrapping up this contract, and oh, by the way, we did a change order 9 months ago, and here's change order 1, 2, and 3, and it just goes through, and a lot of the governing bodies will just run it at that. So, change orders are a whole nother topic. They got to be under 20%. If they're over 20%, I've run into that one time, and there's a whole slew of requirements that have to be done. So if all these things add up into your report, you got to make sure all those I's are dotted and T's are crossed when you send it down to the comptrollers, because they will take a shot at you. And I've certainly experienced that as well. So 2.5 million or more contract units have to provide your post-award notification for any contract exceeding 2.5 million within the 20 business days of award. They will not stop your project. And this is from them. I was recently at the GPA conference, and I had the pleasure of listening to one of the comptrollers speak on projects. And they'll readily admit 2.5 million, unless it's something really egregious or there's some fraud or something that Roy had alluded to. And again, you know what? We are the professionals. I've personally lived through some corruption in my career and have seen it. But again, we're the ones that see things and say, no, that's not right. We're not doing a resolution on that. We have to do it right, or we stop things. So they really should put more faith in us at the local level, because everybody's been around, everybody's a professional, and we all do, we do care. And I don't think they give us enough credit for that. They tend to think that something nefarious is going on, and it's not. So anyway, at 2.5 million or more, they're not going to stop your project. They are going to try to, gently tell you, no, this is not how you should do it next time. At 12.5 million or more, they become much more, I don't want to say aggressive, but much more diligent in their notifications to you. Again, make sure you know the value of the contract. Total contract cost, 2 or more years. What's the total value? That's the determinant number. That was a great question before. Construction projects include change orders, pushing over. This is very important. Make sure your QPAs, your CFOs, your other professionals. Construction is very different from goods and services in the US. They all have their own rules. Make sure they're very aware of what's required, and it's become even more, onerous since the last 10 years. Clearly, again, fair and open versus required disclosure. If you're doing your EUS, and we have that's the best practice question that came through. The EUS, how do you procure your insurance brokers or insurance related items? Part of that is your fair and open versus required disclosure. Make sure you're up on that. They're going to want to see, if you're doing required disclosure, they're going to want to see your PCDs, the political contribution disclosures. They're going to want to see the BEDCs, the business entity disclosure contribution forms. Don't forget on them, there's the new $200 threshold. So you have to amend those forms as well. It used to be the $300 contribution threshold. So make sure your forms are all up to date. Ensure you have a point person in your municipality well-versed in these things, either your QPA, the CFO, the administrator, the attorney, somebody. But when you're dealing with them, they are kind of ruthless, and they don't, they want an answer. They're not going to take you hemming and hawing. So make sure whoever your point person is very well-versed in dealing with these aspects. Usually you will just get some comments and they close out the case number. Emergency contracts. Okay, there's another area. Contracting units have to provide post-award notification for any contract for an amount exceeding 2.5. Obviously, we don't have the pre-award on an emergency, at least I hope not, because if you have time for that, it's not an emergency. But your post-award $2.5 million contracts, again, make sure in emergencies, everything is documented. Has to be given. Now, they change on this. Emergencies are 30 business days after award or after your emergency, not 20 business days. Make sure that you have in place a purchasing policy and that addresses emergencies. Everybody on here, if they work with me or my other towns that I'm like I said, I find myself very fortunate. I really love what I do, and I like doing the purchasing. It's just kind of a geeky niche I like, but they have purchasing policies in place. And the most recent upload I had done was to address the federal requirements. We've been dealing with the CARES and the ARPA money so much, and they're gonna be subject to audit. So again, the whole federal CFR 200 requirements have to be in your purchasing policy. So make sure you have a good purchasing policy. Make sure emergencies are addressed in that purchasing policy. Very similar to what Roy had mentioned as to your personnel policies. Make sure your purchasing policy is up to date. It addresses emergencies. The administrative code requires we have a chain of command as to who can declare an emergency, and normally it's the CEO. And then it kind of leaves it up to you after that. So I was trying to do the CEO or their designate. That may be the manager, maybe the governing body, maybe the administrator. I don't know. But make sure that you have that spelled out in your purchasing policy. Ensure all your procurement is followed for emergencies. No multi-year contracts for emergencies. I get this occasionally. Well, you know what? We hired Jon Rheinhardt Incorporated. Boy, they did such a great job. We're going to keep them for another 5 years. Yeah, that's nice, but let's do a proper procurement after the emergency's done. One final note, and then I'll take any questions. Roy's right. The comptrollers are not always right, and it's very frustrating. I've butted heads with them on several items, including throwing the exact definition within, in this case, the local public's contract law right at them. This is what it says, and they say no, it doesn't. We don't care. Do it this way, and it's a frustrating endeavor. They're often intentionally difficult. And they certainly are at times unprofessional. They take shots outside the scope of their mission, and I've taken a little canning fodder from them as well as Roy, and they certainly have no problem sending letters that just go well beyond any scope of what you're submitting for pre-approval. They really go far afield, and they have no problem painting with a broad brush. And I don't quite understand why they do that, why they feel the need to, but it's a cultural norm, unfortunately. They may undertake a white paper, use your organization as an example. They try to do some shaming. Again, at times their interpretations are at odds with the statutes. Everybody knows Mark Pfeiffer, and I've certainly Mark is on my quick dial list as well. And I've run some scenarios by him, and he's shaking his head going, they're wrong on that, but they don't care. Other times they are easy to work with. I find usually in the post-award notifications, if everything is buttoned up, it's a pretty quick process. The pre-approvals, it's much more difficult, and they are really going to scrutinize your contracts and everything, you know, down to the letter. And that is their job, but sometimes maybe it's a little bit more overzealous than it needs to. Unfortunately, there's not a lot you can do for pre-approvals other than fight with them. You know, hope they change their stance. And at times, and I've had to, you have to amend items in your packets, even though it's completely against, you know, what sometimes the letter of the law says, sometimes how you've been trained. It is what it is. So that's my brief, you know, tidbits on how to deal with them on the procurement aspect. I'd be happy to entertain any questions. If anybody needs to get in touch with me, there's my email, my phone. Most of you know me, and I'm on a short, you know, quick dial or text or email away. So I want to thank Bud and everybody for inviting me. I always enjoy speaking to this group.
Jon, it's always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Bud.
Sure. And John, I don't know if you have any other. Katie, did you want to have a polling question?
Yeah, I was going to say I'll launch one last poll. If, like Sean said, if anyone has any questions, put them in the chat, and John might have a point. But the second question on this one is, what is the objective of the OSC? You've got a couple options there. Like I said, send me an email if you have any trouble answering.
I don't see to wreak havoc. All right, I want to thank Roy and Sean for this morning too. Unfortunately, Roy and I are actually at a board meeting for the GFOA that we've got to start and participate. So I'm going to still stay on. I'm going to listen, but I might not be active.
Okay. Hey, Sean, you had mentioned the change in the pay-to-play threshold for contributions. Do you know if the division has promulgated any regs for the change in the law yet?
Yeah, I was waiting. That's a good question, Bud. They just came out with an LFN. I think it was July. I'll look it up real quick and I'll put it in the chat box what the number is. But they put it out in July. There was two key components on that. One was well, there's more than just two key. They had a whole slew, but the ones that really kind of affect us was the contribution threshold dropped to $200. And one nice thing, and we really haven't implemented it yet, but by resolution, your municipality can authorize the QPA to just go ahead and authorize window contracts that are fair and open. So if we're doing, and this happens a lot, especially with public works, we'll get a construction job for $30,000, and if you do that as a fair and open means just putting it on your website. You don't necessarily have to do the full legal advertisement. If that's done in a fair and open process, and the municipality authorizes by resolution, you can the QPA can approve it and go right into requisition. So you don't have to wait for the following. A lot of times that's always a time frame. The governing body meets once a month, and we're always in a hurry to get things done. So those were the two key components came out of that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bud.
So there's a question in the, actually it's more of a comment in the Q&A box. Maybe the JFOA board can talk to the acting DCA commissioner and the Comptroller's office and have a sit-down meeting. I don't know if anyone would want to talk about how likely that would be, and if there's a real motivation for the DCA to meet with the Comptroller's office. Sean, do you know if the Comptroller's office is under DCA, or are they under Treasury, or?
No, they're outside of DCA, unfortunately, because it's something I've been dealing with one of the clients. We actually had a conference with DLGS and Jacqueline before she moved up, and kind of laid out our problems. And the difficulty becomes they're one state agency, and the comptrollers. I don't know who they fall under. It's not DCA, but they're another state agency, and it's kind of far afield asking one to blast the other. But I think they have internal conversations where they try to keep it nice, and that's going on right now in one pre-advertisement. We found another way around it. We just kind of did it, or we did it our own way and in accord with law, and I'm sure they're not happy with that, but whatever. The local finance notice is 2023 -14, I believe. Let's see. I'm pulling it up right. Yeah, 2023 -14. I'm going to put that to the chat right now. It just came out in that was August 8th.
Okay.
That's what it looks like if anybody needs to see it.
Great. Thanks, Katie. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
There's more in the chat. Okay. No questions there. All right. So do we want to move on to cannabis? So I'll introduce our speakers on cannabis. First, Frank Pinto. Frank's career includes 25 years working in the public sector for the County of Morris. Frank managed a variety of planning and social service programs. Frank was the director of the Morris County Agricultural Development Board for over 10 years, managing to complete 100 farmland transactions totaling over 6,100 acres and over $127 million in easement value. Frank oversaw the county's Preservation Trust Fund, seeing it hit the 20,000 preserved acres plateau. Frank has served on several nonprofit boards, as well as one term on the Chester Borough Council. He graduated from Old Dominion University with a BS in geography and received his master's degree in public administration from Fairleigh Dickinson University. Frank is now the owner of Pinto Consulting and focuses on the agricultural industry, land conservation, and sustainability measures. And our other speaker on cannabis is Doug Cabana. Doug is currently the township administrator in the township of Boonton and a county commissioner for the County of Morris. Doug is also an attorney of law. He's the past president of the New Jersey Association of Counties and the past president of the Morris County League of Municipalities. Thank you both for presenting today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Doug, am I going first?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Bud, thanks for the introduction. Doug and I are talking about a dramatically different topic than what we just covered. As Bud said, my consulting world is really focused on land conservation and the agricultural industry. I had no interest in cannabis until I got a call from an individual who had what I thought was a rather novel concept. And something that's not, what I'm going to talk about does not apply to a lot of urban municipalities. This is something really for the rural communities, but is an opportunity to participate in the cannabis industry and to generate tax revenue for municipalities, particularly those with small tax bases. Right now, as you probably know, the multi-state operators are the lion's share of the cannabis production. It's being done in warehouses. Doug's town is a little unique in that he has a large-scale greenhouse operation, but that is not the normal cannabis growing situation in New Jersey at the moment. But there is a market demand for local sunlit grown cannabis, and some actually refer to it as in terms of like the wine industry with terroir. I'm not a user, so I don't really know what that means in terms of cannabis, but there is a demand for organic and locally grown cannabis products. So many of you probably know what the CRC, the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, can issue in terms of licenses. There's 6 different types of licenses. There's also 2 classes of or 2 types of all of those classes of licenses: the standard and the micro business. And what I'm going to be speaking about is directly related to the micro business aspect. All of the micro businesses have to operate in a footprint no greater than 2,500 square feet. In the case of a cultivation center, that really means the area in which the plants are located. So if you were speaking, and what I'm going to be talking about is in a greenhouse setting, the greenhouse footprint itself could be somewhat larger than 2,500 square feet, allowing area for a bathroom, for walking aisles. It's the planting beds, if you will, is where that what we're talking about would be the 2,500 square feet. It's also important to note that your municipality by ordinance can really limit what types of licenses they would entertain in their municipality. So a municipality could say we only want to see cultivation occurring. They could say we only want to see cultivation occurring by micro businesses. So obviously the host municipality has all of that discretion. One interesting aspect of the micro business licenses is that the holder of the license must be a resident of the municipality or one of the contiguous municipalities. So it's not a multi-state operator that can go in and capture a large micro business threshold in New Jersey. It's really designed for the small business operator. This is a schematic of what a 5 greenhouse micro business greenhouse operation might look like. The entire footprint on the right is approximately 1 acre in size. It's actually less than that. This schematic is showing a photovoltaic installation that could power all the greenhouses. An agricultural based operation is what really is proposed. And to give you a sense of scale, this is a 50-acre farm in a Hunterdon County municipality. The area in white is roughly the 1 acre for where the greenhouse operation could be located. An analysis and something that a municipality should require is a review of a property to determine that the site really will not have any odor or any other nuisance type issues. What I feel is appropriate is to have natural or artificial screening from a road, set back from adjoining residential properties by hundreds of feet. So if you are a rural municipality, you can mitigate a lot of the issues that have arisen over the years with indoor growing and warehouses. It really comes down to proper buffering and screening. The analysis that we're doing on properties is looking at all of these aspects of an operation. And yes, this is the State Agriculture Development Committee has ruled that cannabis cultivation is an agricultural product. It does not deviate from deed of easement. Jason, please don't freak out. We're not proposing this at the Backer Farm. It certainly can be something that is suitable on a preserve farm. It is important to note that the activities are not protected under the Right to Farm Act. It is another state law, so it must be fully compliant with municipal regulations. Just showing a Google Street View of the property that I was showing in the previous screen. The proposed facility, you can't even see the location of it from the road. To me, that's an ideal circumstance. It's important to note, if you're talking about a cultivation facility, there is no public visiting the property. There is no traffic generated other than employees. To give you a sense of scale, one 2,500 square foot greenhouse facility could generate somewhere in the ballpark of $250,000 to $500,000 in tax revenue based on that 2% tax. And most of you probably are aware there's no restrictions on that sales tax revenue. Municipality can do whatever it sees fit with that. And that is really, I'm just providing this as an opportunity to show how a rural municipality might actually be able to participate in the cannabis industry. It's legal. It's not going away. It's certainly going to be a increase in the amount of cultivation that's occurring. As that increase occurs, obviously the prices, the demand is going to drop, but there will be a point at which the CRC will prohibit any additional cultivation from occurring. The CRC is far from that number right now. I don't think they are revealing what their what their total build out number is. I've heard 1.5 million square feet, but I don't think that there is a set number at this point. So thank you for your time, Doug. I mean, I can take any questions, or we can turn this over to Doug if he wants to take over at this point.
Yeah, it looks like the question is from the past presentation. Good morning, everyone. Doug Cabana. I'm the administrator here in Boonton Township. And I think we need to really present the balance to what Frank said, because the cannabis operation in any municipality is a balance, because you know, it is a huge tax benefit, a financial benefit to any municipality, no matter which one of the licenses. But each license comes with a positive and a negative to it, which really the governing body needs to kind of consider before, you know, moving forward with it. Now, Boonton Township is a small tax-based municipality, residential, very limited, no commercial. But that was the farthest thing from whatever the township committee was thinking at the time. The property in question was a farm since 1927. It was a local flower farm, 16 acres. It was on the market for several years. And then the property also adjoins the Interceptor sewer line, as well as neighboring municipalities' well fields, and it is in a residential zone. And this was back during the time when the latest round, which we'll get to the next one, of affordable housing was coming, and there was some grumblings that there was going to be an intervening lawsuit by a developer to construct condominiums on the site, which was not appealing to neither the neighbors or to the governing body. Then they were approached by another entity wanting to convert the facility or use the facility for medical cannabis. Now, needless to say, there was a lot of outcry from the neighbors, believing that this was going to end up looking like a prison with fencing and barbed wiring and lighting and all the sounds and smells and everything else that comes with that kind of operation. But quite frankly, it's been farthest from the truth what's happened. And looking at it, like I said, the balance part of it, you know, essentially, it started medical, and even when we started with medical, the township was able to negotiate 0.5% of tax benefit. Only the communities with the medical dispensaries received the 2%. The cultivating communities had no financial benefit. But we worked with the owner of the property to get something, and that resulted after a year of about $71,000 in revenue to the township. And that was before recreational went. And at the beginning, it wasn't necessarily an issue. The current property has about 116,000 square feet in use, of which 50,000 is the canopy. And as Frank mentioned earlier, the canopy is the growing portion of it. That's where you're going to have your issues with smell, noise. Then the balance is about 66,000 square feet of that site, which is, we call processing, but better known as manufacturing and support. There's an indoor grow and an outdoor grow. And I think that's anyone considering a cultivation scenario really has to look at those closely. While this is a protected farmland crop, the right to farm comes into play here. And that's something that our township committee did consider heavily in moving this project forward. But I'll be honest, the greenhouse grow really doesn't work as well as the indoor grow. The indoor grow is completely sealed. It's completely monitored. You don't have any smells. You don't have any noise. So it's a good neighbor. While the greenhouse grow, you have some air exchanges, depending on the atmospheric conditions, may end up having a low cloud cover, and once there's an exchange of that air through the greenhouse, it's hovered in, and unfortunately this is located in a valley. So it does hover a bit. So you need to look at that. And I think, plus the indoor product is a better quality product because it's in a controlled environment than it is in the greenhouse grow. So they're also looking at expanding, and the township is working with them to expand. simply because you start to realize that there is such a huge benefit to the community and to the taxpayers. For instance, this year, township has applied $700,000 to the tax base to offset any increase in pay for all of the capital projects that the township undertook. And we're still sitting on $1 million just sitting in revenue, in surplus right now. Based on that, we're averaging about 1.2 million a year under the current scenario. And when they expand, we're looking to expand that number too. In a state where everybody talks the line about, property tax relief, there is none, as we've seen coming out of Trenton. But what we have seen is this is the only, form of self-help and the only form of a property tax relief you could afford your residents and still maintain the services. So, I'm trying to see here. Yeah, again, pitfalls or smell, the odor, which is not something. It's not like you go here and it's prevalent. It's just in spurts depending on some of the conditions. However, it is definitely something to consider. And I think all in all, this town took a chance and was one of the first towns to move into this direction. I think others are starting to see the financial benefits from having a facility of some type. And, I believe that the cultivation, the warehousing, the distribution is the less controversial, is less traffic generating, to that effect, less effective on the neighbors, as opposed to possibly the retail component of this, where you're going to have more crowds. And you're going to have police protection in the areas that these dispensaries have opened, and concerns from the neighbors about who would be drawn to those dispensaries. But we don't have that here. In fact, there's no zoning for it except for the licenses that can be issued to the pre-existing medical facility. And that kind of insulates the town from opening up areas that could be potentially anyone coming in and wanting to do any kind of business. So it's kind of limited on that. So that's kind of the nutshell capsule of what happened in Boonton Township and how we're benefiting from this operation. So, and I'll take any questions if anybody has any on that. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions at all on this topic so far. Katie, I don't know if you have a question to put up for the group.
Yep. I'll jump in and do a poll. Okay, you guys should see the first question. So, does your municipality allow the sale of cannabis? I'll leave it up for a minute and then share the results with everyone just to gauge the audience.
And then, of course, there were two questions there was one question from the former one, which was more of a statement. Said, I wonder if there would be more fairness by the Comptroller's office if that person was required to be an RMA instead of a lawyer. Always interesting.
Sorry, someone's taking shots at attorneys, Doug and Ed. Sorry about that.
That's fine.
And then we'll ask this question after the poll question is finished.
Just so you guys know, that's fair game for a CMFO roundtable.
All right, so it looks like majority no, but a decent amount do allow the sale of cannabis. So thank you.
And then, Doug, this one came in right as we were going into the polling question. The financial benefit is obvious, but I've heard some stories of crop failure. That's something to consider, right? Is Boonton Township taking any steps to protect itself from a sudden loss of revenue that it grew to rely on? Yeah, that it grew to rely on. That's cute. I like that, Adam.
Yeah, that is good, Adam. And I've told him, he knows about that because we did have a crop failure here early on. And when you're talking, again, we're talking the difference between indoor grow and the greenhouse grow. And that was a greenhouse facility where a mite got brought in from one of their other facilities and basically wiped out the coal. So all of that crop had to be destroyed. The house had to be sanitized and left fallow for a couple months before they could start again. And it was a substantial revenue loss. And if you look at our sheet of, how you can see that reflected there. Part of the thing, and I credit my CFO, Norman Eckstein, with, looking at what we're going to apply as anticipated revenues and leaving the balance in there. So you're not becoming reliant. Obviously, you're having folks that come forth to the township committee meetings and say, hey, apply all of it. We want tax relief. We want tax cut. And I think that's just being, foolish, because you don't know in a situation like this or anything else. I mean, this is going to end up, in my view, going the way of like the banks, where, someone's going to come in and start eating up the small guy, so to speak, and you're going to have fewer and fewer of these cultivators in the state. And worse, if the state does allow the cannabis to be grown out of state, that's going to be going right over the border very quickly. So to self-preservation, we need to keep it here in New Jersey. But you just have to be very prudent and conservative with the monies and how you apply them, so you don't end up in a situation like something like that. Katie did put a little clip on there, and that's the map of the Boonton Township facility. It looks more impressive than it is, but if you will, on the top, that area is still to be expanded. So that's an existing greenhouse, but has not been converted. The lower facility, the lower building is there's the 76,000 square foot. That's most of it. And then the cannabis growing operations are the other two, but it fits into the neighborhood. It really blends in well. It still looks like a farm. And if you were just driving by, you wouldn't really notice anything change. So.
Doug or Frank, do you guys know and I apologize if this was already discussed in the presentation, but do you guys know the extent of cannabis operations in Morris County or the state itself?
I think Morris County is only Boonton Township for cultivation, and several towns have a Rockaway Borough has a dispensary. I believe Butler may have a dispensary.
Yeah, there's very few dispensaries, and I'm only aware of Doug's facility for cultivation in Morris County.
Yeah.
Any idea about how it's statewide?
Well, there's a couple. I understand there was one down in South Jersey that they had two facilities. They closed one, and now in the second facility they've scaled back. Now I don't know if that's because there's more product coming into the market, or whether or not there's just a reduction in demand.
Well, I would say no, there's not a reduction in demand, Doug. Reddington Township has a large facility, a former Walmart. They had significant issues with odors. They've been addressed through, filters and filtration. The concept that I presented is smaller scale than what's being done now. There's going to be a change in the market. There's going to be a reduction in wholesale prices of cannabis. Right now, a pound is wholesaling for over $3,000 a pound. That likely is going to go cut in half. So the long-term growers are going to need to do this in a sustainable, cost-effective manner. That's why I think farm-based cultivation makes a lot of sense. You can mitigate the energy costs using PV, the scale of the operations. They can be using drip irrigation, and it's just a lot less financially intensive. All of the indoor grow are going to have more and more difficulties as energy prices escalate. One of their biggest costs is energy. So looking at that, it really needs to be done in a more sustainable fashion, so that it doesn't have those impacts, and it has that economic sustainability going forward. It's also something like, Doug pointed out with the financing, the prices, the host municipalities' benefits are going to reduce over time as more cannabis hits the market and the prices start to drop. So that's going to be directly reflected in that 2% sales tax revenue. I think as a CFO, one would want to set aside, in particular for crop failure, at least a year's revenue in your surplus, so that you can weather that issue of if you had a complete crop failure.
Good idea. And that is a concern, and has been a concern.
Sure.
How you use this, and because it can be catastrophic if you come rely upon it and it gets cut out from under your.
Right. I don't think a municipality should rely on it. You know, in my mind, it's like pay down debt, get rid of debt, and then start using it for maybe tax reduction purposes, you know, percentage of it.
Yeah, and even like our this year, like first quarter, we ended up with 298,000, second quarter 341, third quarter 419. Why is that raising? It was similar last year. Second quarter was 250,000, third quarter 400,000, and then fourth quarter 313,000. So there is this fluctuation on that. Now that is a 2% on the recreational and a 0.5% on the medical. So it could play into whatever market is there. Obviously we would prefer the recreational for the benefit, but you know, there's large fluctuations here, so it's difficult to actually budget for it and anticipate it, and you know, to rely upon it.
And for those more rural municipalities, there are, I think, over 100 hemp growers at the moment that are doing outdoor hemp grow, and the odor profile is exactly the same as cannabis. So when you think about the odors, think about, you know, do you have any hemp farms in your municipality? And it would be related, a very similar odor profile to that. It's when you concentrate it in the indoor grows, that's when you get the odor complaints. So again, another reason I think that larger scale, large farms with smaller facilities is something that's politically acceptable to a lot of municipalities. And that's really what this whole idea is that it's got to be acceptable to the elected officials and then the residents.
While you guys were talking, Adam Brewer sent a text saying that Pequannock Township has medical cultivation.
I was not aware, Adam.
I wonder, is that part of the
I should be. I work for
facilities?
Yeah, no. Yes, that's true. I forgot that. Sorry, Adam. You guys are.
That's right.
Yep.
The Van something is probably growing it. The Van Voots, the Van Wingertons.
Van Wingertons, yeah. Yep. People think it's in the neighboring town over there, but it's actually Pequannock.
Yeah, he also identifies it as an indoor facility.
Yeah.
Katie, do you have another poll question?
Yep, I'll jump in here and do the second poll. Like Bud said, if anyone has any questions, put them in the chat. In the meantime, the second question is, would you consider your municipality more urban or more rural? And I'll leave it open for a minute and then share the results. All right, make sure you get your responses in. All right, looks like we're pretty split 50-50, which sounds like New Jersey for you, rural and urban. So yeah, pretty much tracks. Thank you.
I wonder if any of the attendees have any cannabis operations within their towns, whether it's retail or grow. Does anybody want to share?
We did ask, the first poll was who allows, if you allow the sale, and even though it's a little bit different between growing and selling, we got mostly no's, some yeses though. So yeah, like Bud said, if anyone wants to share.
Just keep in mind, dispensaries are just one of the many different licenses that can be permitted.
Okay, I don't see anything coming up in the chat or Q&A. So there is a comment in Vernon. We permit all licenses in Vernon Township, but they have yet to get one through land use. Frank or Doug, are you guys familiar with that process?
Doug would be for sure. You know, certainly any kind of grow facility or dispensary, whatever, has to go through the site plan process.
Mhm.
I think Mr. Buzak knows a little something about land use law.
Yeah, well, just
But yeah, certainly, you know, the site plan the town can issue an ordinance permitting it, but certainly the planning board has to still go through and permit it.
I think in Boonton Township, Doug may remember that there were some heated planning board hearings, or Board of Adjustment hearings, I guess it was actually, because that was not a permitted use in the zone. Is that correct, Doug?
It was planning board, because we have the land use board now. But the question was, at the time, an application had come in to basically rearrange the buildings to create their ideal operation. And the net of that was that they just converted the existing buildings, so it was within the existing footprint and didn't need planning board approval. So the application was withdrawn. And that's how, now more recently, Township Committee has amended the land use ordinance to say, if you stay within the existing footprint of the farm buildings, then you can reconstruct, renovate, and rebuild so that you don't have to go to the planning board for site plan approval, because it's all a pre-existing operation, so it would be approved most likely anyway.
Doug, in Boonton Township's case, did you permit cultivation by ordinance, or was it like a resolution of support?
No, it was an ordinance.
The CRC.
Well, other than delivery, cultivation, manufacturing, wholesaling, distribution are permitted by ordinance, but only at the facility that was the pre-existing recreation, medical marijuana facility.
Sounds a little like spot zoning.
No, it's not. It just, because if there was another one in the town, then it would have worked. But it wasn't spot zoning, no. Understanding that it was not. So it's technically not permitted anywhere.
Gotcha.
But yeah.
So John, there was another question. Did you want to pose that? You're muted, John.
You'd figure after 3 years of this, I'd be able to figure it out by now, huh? It says we have 3 applications currently. We hit an issue with the Highlands up here. This was in response to the Vernon one that had just come up recently. 3 applications currently, hit an issue with the Highlands up here for the first application. So I guess there are other factors that play into it, you know, other than just local issues, but the Highlands as well. Thoughts on that one?
Frank, you're the Highlands guy.
Yeah. I actually thought Vernon was outside of the Highlands region. But yeah, certainly that is, I mean, everyone knows that the Highlands preservation areas have a very strict impervious coverage limitation, 3%. So yeah, that's definitely a factor. It also speaks to why you might want to look at an existing facility for it. And I know that's why warehouses have become very popular. The economics of it are, a municipality will usually permit it by ordinance in warehouse industrial zones. The one landlord in town that has the vacant warehouse then totally jacks up their square foot rates and hoses the cultivator. The whole idea of making it farm-based kind of changes that economic dynamic, where you've got multiple farms that could effectively be competing for a facility in that municipality. But going back to the Highlands, yeah, it's certainly another factor. DEP, of course, is another factor. So, you know, they can be water intensive. Obviously, with drip irrigation, you can reduce water loads and other site plan matters. But yeah, you certainly can't trump the the Highlands restrictions.
I also received a text from Senator Oroho. He said there is also an indoor facility in Franklin in Sussex. And he also said that he's under the impression that there's going to be a large facility in Vineland.
I'm not aware of that, but that's interesting to know. But to Doug's point, you know, there was a facility in South Jersey that did go under. The multi-state operators are, you know, they're the ones that are leading the charge with these large indoor grow facilities. I think over time, as the price starts to reduce, you're going to see more of those close. So it's really you got to find a way long term to cultivate and still keep it profitable. And to me, the way to do that is reducing, you know, automation, and, you know, to reduce employees and to reduce energy costs.
Mhm.
I don't see any other questions or comments. Thanks, both Frank and Doug. I appreciate your guys' input on this session and the information.
You're very welcome.
Yep, welcome.
Okay, so we'll go to affordable housing. Patrick Lafferty is the zoning officer for the town of Boonton, Office of Zoning, Code Enforcement, and Housing. Patrick has 22 years of inspection experience, private affordable housing management, and affordable housing experience from managing units, assisting in the development of units for nonprofit and for-profit, and working with developers on construction, planning, and rent-up of affordable housing units. He's a public employee of 3 municipalities over the last 20 years. Also, Ed Buzak. Ed is one of the 3 assistant counsel to the New Jersey State of League of Municipalities, an associate counsel to the New Jersey Planning Officials, and a member of the MLUL Drafting Committee. He's a past chair of the Local Government Law Section of the New Jersey State Bar Association, and is a past president of the New Jersey Institute of Local Government Attorneys. He has lectured and written extensively on government topics, including the Local Government Ethics Law, Local Public Contracts Law, Open Public Meetings Act, Open Public Records Act, Municipal Land Use Law, and Mount Laurel COA matters. He's practiced in the public sector for 50 years and has represented municipalities as general and special counsel, counties as special counsel, planning boards, boards of adjustment, sewage authorities, MUAs, and other agencies of local government. He was co-counsel to 5 Mercer County municipalities in the 41-day affordable housing methodology trial before Judge Jacobson in 2017, resulting in her 217-page opinion in 2018, and has represented municipalities in affordable housing declaratory judgment cases stemming from the 2015 Supreme Court case in multiple counties. Mr. Buzak has litigated a variety of cases in the public sector field, including zoning and planning matters, construction claims, eminent domain matters, and contract matters, among others. He has practiced actively before all New Jersey courts, including the Law Division, Appellate Division, and the Supreme Court. A New Jersey native, Mr. Buzak graduated cum laude from Union College, Schenectady, New York in 1970 with a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science, and received his Juris Doctor degree from Georgetown University Law Center in 1973. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Pat, do you want to go first? However you want to handle it is fine with me.
And I'll defer to you. I think you'll be able to provide a real solid foundation of the history of affordable housing. So I'll defer to you.
All right, that's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you all for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here to speak about one of my favorite topics, which is affordable housing and the whole Mount Laurel doctrine. I've divided my presentation into sort of 3 segments. where we were, because I think it's important to just go back and understand the history of this briefly, but to just set the context that many of us have experienced, others of us really haven't, and may have read about it. Second segment would be where we are. That is where we are today. What's the status of affordable housing law and cases and regulation and so forth. And the last segment is where we are going. And that's much more of a nebulous, speculative aspect. But I want to provide some or offer some thoughts about where we may be going, because this affordable housing concept, which has been around now for almost 50 years, as long as I've practiced, is not going away. So let me begin, and we were talking about some important dates. I know we started out today with the creation of the Office of the State Comptroller. So an important date for my purposes is 1975. I'd only been practicing a couple of years at that point, but 1975 is the year in which the first Mount Laurel case was decided, and you'll hear it referred to in the field and in the municipal government field as Mount Laurel 1, and there's actually 4 or 5 of them depending upon how you count them, and we'll get to that in a minute. But in 1975, the Supreme Court made a determination that changed the face of development in the state of New Jersey. What they decided was that because the ability to regulate land resided in the state legislature as a result of the 1948 New Jersey Constitution, and the legislature decided that they were going to delegate that right to regulate land to municipalities, and they did that as early as the 1950s in the Municipal Planning Law, Planning Act. They revised that in 1975, effective in 1976, under the Municipal Land Use Law, where we practice now. The state delegated the ability to regulate land to local units, to municipalities. And the Supreme Court decided that since municipalities derived their power to regulate land from the legislature, and the legislature derived its power from the Constitution, when a municipality exercised that power, it had to exercise it for the promotion of the general welfare, which is a provision in the New Jersey Constitution as well as the federal Constitution. And in order to promote the general welfare, a municipality had to provide for a variety of different types of housing opportunities within its borders. And specifically, what they decided was that every developing municipality in the state of New Jersey had to provide, through their land use regulations, their zoning and land use regulations, a realistic opportunity for the construction of that municipality's share of the region's low and moderate income housing needs. Now, that's a mouthful, but that is the essence of the Mount Laurel Doctrine that really exists today. But in articulating that, you hear a number of words that are extremely subjective. A realistic opportunity, what is that? A fair share, what is that? Of the regions, what's the regions? And low and moderate income housing needs, what's that? I mean, we know just by Webster definition what those words mean, but what does it mean in the context of that? But the Supreme Court, it was a landmark, clearly a landmark decision in 1975, and they left it to the municipalities largely to proceed and implement this lofty policy that they had. And when I say lofty, I don't mean that in any kind of sarcastic way. But as I said, the policy was articulated in a very subjective way. So there were not objective standards that would be applied. And to the Supreme Court's credit, they assumed municipalities would pick up the gauntlet and change their zoning ordinances to ensure that they were not, quote, exclusionary, unquote, and allowed for this variety of housing and promoted the general welfare. Well, for all of us who have been in local government, that doesn't necessarily happen all the time. And indeed, in this field, it did not happen. Municipalities largely, and I don't mean to be critical, but municipalities largely ignored the gauntlet that the Supreme Court had put down for them to pick up and revise zoning ordinances. So that led some 8 years later in 1983 to what's known as Mount Laurel II. And in that case, again, a Supreme Court case, different court, different members of the court, but Chief Justice Willents, who was a strong advocate for affordable housing in general and for inclusionary development, made a determination that municipalities had not done what they were supposed to do. And while we, the Supreme Court, do not build housing, we do enforce the Constitution. So this is what he, and I say he, I mean the court, did in 1983. First, they tried to create a measuring rod or a measuring stick or measuring tape to define this concept of growth. And they now said any municipality whose lands, any portion of the land was within the, quote, growth area of what was then called the State Development Guide Plan, would have this constitutional obligation. So they still didn't go through the mechanics of it, but they narrowed developing municipality as being one that was within the growth area in the state plan. So again, you looked at the plan. If you had any portion of your municipality in the growth area, then you needed to heed the call to modify zoning ordinances. But they realized that's from 1975 that their direction was not necessarily followed. So they decided to really get down into the weeds on this. And what they did was to appoint 3 judges in the state, one in the north, one in central, one in southern Jersey, that would hear all affordable housing cases. So you didn't have random judges in random counties hearing the case. So for example, in Morris County, we had to go down to Middlesex County, and Judge Skillman was the judge who was assigned to the northern section of the state. Judge Serpentelli was in the middle of the state. He's from Ocean County. And Judge Gibson, was in Atlantic County, did the southern part of the state. And the idea was that these judges would become proficient in the area. They would establish policies through litigation that would be brought, and that there would emerge from all of that a plan, a consistent plan that would cover the whole state and all municipalities that were at that time subject to the affordable housing obligation, to the Mount Laurel obligation as it became known, would equally share or proportionately share in the obligations. But they realized, okay, that's good. You know, we have this structure set up. But how do we get people to sue? You know, how do we get cases before them? So what they did was they created, and again, you know, many of you have heard this before, they created the builder's remedy. And the builder's remedy is a judicial remedy that developed from litigation that had occurred between 1975 and 1983, where a property owner would contract to sell their land to a developer, and the developer who wanted to build largely multifamily higher density housing and set aside some portion as affordable units, would go to the municipality, seek a rezoning. Rezoning was refused, and they would then sue the municipality saying that you are violating the Mount Laurel Doctrine, your constitutional obligation, and therefore you need to rezone my land. And what the municipalities did in defense is in those cases where they felt vulnerable or perhaps were vulnerable, or the court determined, yes, that municipality has not satisfied its constitutional obligation by revising its land use regulations, the municipality would rezone properties other than those that were the subject matter of the litigation. So the developer would bring the lawsuit. He would vindicate the rights of low and moderate income households and you know, create the opportunity for rezoning, but then wouldn't get his land rezoned. So it was a great thing that he did for, you know, the world in general, or the state in general, in his view, and in the court's view. But he didn't get any relief. You know, developers weren't doing this to vindicate the rights of low and moderate income households. Developers were doing this to be able to build projects because that's what they do. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you know, that was their obligation. So there was a disconnect. There was no incentive for developers to do that because they risked going through all of this expense. And if they were successful, they only were successful in vindicating this amorphous right. And again, I don't say that lightly, but this constitutional right. But while they were interested in that, they were really interested in getting the land rezoned so they can build their project and carry on their business. So the Supreme Court created this builder's remedy. And what they said was, if a builder or a developer brought this lawsuit and was successful in vindicating the right, having the court make the determination that the municipality had not satisfied its constitutional obligation, then the municipality had to rezone that land. Not somebody else's land, but that land, provided that there were no significant environmental constraints, topographic restraints, and so forth. So it wasn't a complete carte blanche, but the developer now had a real incentive to go forward, because if he were successful, and as I said, municipalities hadn't picked up the gauntlet very much between 1975 and 1983, the developer would be able to achieve what was perhaps their primary objective without disparaging the profession of developers. That's what they're in business for, to build. They're not in business to vindicate constitutional rights. That's for other people to do. And that builder's remedy became the nemesis of municipalities, at least in my view. Others don't see it that way, but from my perspective of this, it accomplished the goal it was supposed to accomplish, and that was to have a variety of lawsuits being brought against municipalities who were trying to figure out how to defend it. And in both of these cases, in the Mount Laurel 1 and Mount Laurel 2 case, the Supreme Court said, two different courts, meaning two different sets of judges, but all the Supreme Court, said, look, we don't want to be in this field. We're not builders. We're here, as I said, as Chief Justice Willen said, we don't build housing, but we enforce the Constitution. So municipalities have the control over zoning and land use. They need to step up to the plate, and the legislature needs to get involved, because the legislature is the one who delegated this right that the legislature derived from the Constitution to the municipalities. So as soon as the legislature gets into this field and figures this out, because courts don't figure these things out, this is a legislative problem. How do you define developing municipality? How do you define realistic opportunity? How do you define fair share? How do you allocate obligations? How do you determine what the obligation is? Courts don't do that. Courts decide cases. That's what they do. And so to some extent, the court felt that they were forced into this role, and they didn't want it. And they continually urged the legislature to do something. Finally, in 1985, the next probably benchmark year. So we have 1975, 1983, and now we have 1985. The legislature, much to the surprise of many of us, myself included, took action, and they adopted the Fair Housing Act. Fair Housing Act of 1975 was signed on July 2nd, 1985. And for the first time, there was a legislative response to try to implement this constitutional obligation that the court had found some 10 years earlier. In the Fair Housing Act, the state created the legislature created an administrative agency known as the Council on Affordable Housing, which is, we call it COA, and tasked that agency with doing all the things, putting all the meat on the bones of that constitutional doctrine that was so elusive in terms of definition, and even eluded the three judges to some extent. The Council on Affordable Housing was comprised of, or is comprised of, 12 members. They're sort of put into three different categories. One, effectively elected officials. That is, 4 of them have to be elected officials. 4 of them have to represent interests of low and moderate income households. And there's specific categories of people, for elected officials. They have elected officials in larger municipalities based upon population, smaller municipalities in representing low and moderate income households. They had the DCA commissioner, so they drill down a little bit in terms of those categories. And the last category, that category for representatives of nonprofit developers, representatives of for-profit developers who do affordable housing, and then 3 other just citizens who had some interest in this. They had 6-year terms and so forth. So this administrative body was created, known as COA, to implement the constitutional obligation. That Fair Housing Act was immediately challenged. And it turned out that we now moved to Mount Laurel 3 in 1986, where the Supreme Court upheld the validity of the Fair Housing Act and effectively said, look, we've been telling the legislature for now 11 years that they ought to act, and they did act. And while it may not be a perfect piece of legislation, as no piece of legislation is, it seems to accomplish the goal we were intending to have accomplished. So we're going to uphold that. So Now the stage was set for the administrative agency to go forward. And to their credit, they then proceeded to issue the first round of regulations, somewhat voluminous, somewhat complicated, to try to, as I said again, and I'll say again, put meat on the bones of these elusive concepts that comprise the constitutional obligation. And they created a methodology to establish the obligation, the statewide obligation, and that was through a series of just very interesting but very complex studies, determinations, and formulas. And once they got that done, they came up with a methodology to allocate that to the various municipalities. And they did that by region. They created regions consisting of, I think it was 2 to 4 or 3 to 4 counties, contiguous counties. And they tried to get an urban county linked with a suburban county at least. And, there were a number of things that these regulations accomplished. But in the end, they proposed them, and in 1987 adopted regulations, and those regulations actually provided obligations, affordable housing obligations, numerical affordable housing obligations to municipalities for the first time, every municipality in the state. And a series then of methods by which a municipality could satisfy that obligation, including things like inclusionary development, which is what we all typically see, where a developer sets aside a percentage of the units that he is building for affordable purposes for low and moderate income households. So they did that in 1987. And the way the act was set up, the Fair Housing Act, it was done where these regulations would have a 6-year life. And the 6-year life was tied to, at the time, the municipal land use law, which had a 6-year, quote, life, unquote, on master plans. That is, every 6 years, a municipality had to re-examine its master plan. So the idea was to mesh those two together chronologically or numerically so that you'd have these regulations expiring when municipalities had to review their master plans and re-examine their master plans. That was later, just as an aside, changed to 10 years. Legislatively, the municipal land use law was changed, and later regulations changed the time period for the validity of the regulations from 6 years to 10 years, again, to mesh with the municipal land use law. So we had a first round set of regulations where assigned numbers were given. There were 3 general components of that, or 2 at the time, actually, the first set of regulations, which was what your indigenous need was. That is, the need to deal with substandard housing within your municipality that was occupied by low and moderate income families. That was a way in which municipalities could satisfy their obligation, had to satisfy their obligation. Everyone had this rehabilitation component. Again, I won't get into the details as to how that was calculated, but suffice it to say, it was not calculated by a count of substandard units in, at that time, 567 municipalities. It was done statistically through census data and other information, and then allocated to a municipality. So municipalities were getting assigned numbers by COA that, you had a rehabilitation obligation of 100 units, and, I'd go to municipal meetings and the governing body would say, well, where are these 100 units? I mean, we have a construction official, we have zoning officers. We don't have 100 substandard units in this municipality. And that may well have been true, and in many cases was true, because the assignment of the number was not, as I said, a hands-on count in each municipality. It was a statistical number and a calculated number. So we had the first round of regulations, went from 1987 to 1993. And the process that was created was that municipalities would get their number. They would create a plan known as a housing element and fair share plan, which was part of their master plan, to accommodate that number. And then there was an administrative process where the municipality would petition COA to review its plan and to approve its plan. If you received an approval from COA that your plan satisfied your constitutional obligation and satisfied the regulations that they had adopted, you received protection from these builder remedy lawsuits. Okay, so first, if you filed before a builder's remedy lawsuit was brought, for the most part, you were protected from a builder coming in the interim period while your plan was being reviewed and bringing a builder's remedy lawsuit. And if you received approval from COA, which was known as substantive certification or subcert, you then continued that protection through that 6-year period. Again, 6 years at the time. So it created a mechanism for municipalities to step up to the plate, to take control of their own destiny, and create a plan, get it approved, and be protected from developers and or property owners making the determinations as to where these projects should be. And again, for the most part, these projects were much higher density projects than the municipality was otherwise used to. So many municipalities took advantage of that. There was a growing process. It was not, the first I went to some of the first meetings with COA, and they were very interesting, and they were finding their way through this morass of material. But it worked relatively well. Municipalities, not a majority of the municipalities, but many municipalities took advantage of that. And it was typically those municipalities that were vulnerable to these builder remedy lawsuits, where development was taking place, where activities were taking place in the state. Those municipalities recognized that they were vulnerable to builder remedy lawsuits, and they needed to control their own destiny and move forward. COA started looking at their regulations, the first round regulations, in the late 80s and early 90s, to now see what they had to do for the second round. And they adopted the second round regulations, which ran from 1993 to 1998 or 1999. And those regulations, again, were relatively complicated. They kept, generally speaking, the same formula, but they had a little problem. And the problem was, okay, we already gave numbers to municipalities in our first round. What do we do with those numbers if they weren't satisfied? Do we add them up? Is this a cumulative obligation? So, as we go on, it's just those numbers just keep increasing. Do we start anew and whatever? So what they did, and again, this is very complicated, but what they generally did was they recalculated the numbers that they had assigned in the first round based upon reality. Because remember, these were projections. This is what was supposed to happen from 1987 to 1983. So now we're in 1992, as they were looking at the regulations to come up with the next round. They had, empirical data as to, well, this is what happened. You might have thought something else was going to happen, but now we know what's going to happen. Let's see how well we did. And it turned out that they were a little bit more aggressive in their speculation as to the growth that the state was going to have and the growth that was going to occur in the various municipalities. So they adjusted the numbers of municipalities. And if you had satisfied your number and now your adjusted number was lower, you'd take credit for those extra units and you'd be able to apply those to the second round. And if not, you had effectively a cumulative obligation. That is an obligation that now ran, because they combined them, for a 12-year period from 1987 to 1999. And now you had to satisfy that obligation. Some municipalities came in, we had more municipalities coming into COA, getting substantive certification, but it became a little bit more difficult. And again, this seminar is not the place to go through all of that, but it became more difficult, and municipalities were complaining that these affordable housing numbers was generating the growth. That is, those numbers were the source, or at least one of the sources, of tremendous growth that they felt was occurring in various municipalities in the state. So it was interesting that the numbers were supposed to reflect what would naturally happen, but because the numbers were out there and municipalities had to satisfy those numbers, and in order to get substantive certification, to get protection from those builder remedy lawsuits, they had to provide a realistic opportunity for those numbers to be achieved. So it was effectively the state saying, okay, here's how you are going to grow. Here's what your number is. And municipalities were creating zoning in order to satisfy that number. So, to some extent, the criticism that this was creating growth as opposed to accommodating the growth that would naturally occur and making sure that some portion of that was inclusive in terms of affordable housing, it was a valid criticism. So to their credit, again, COA decided that they better think about this a little bit more. And they did. They held a series of roundtables with various groups, individuals, and so forth. But 1999 came and went, and there were no new regulations. 2000 came and went, and there were no new regulations. And it wasn't until the end of 2003 that COA came up with the third round regulations. And what they had done there, though, was a significant shift in focus. As I said, in the first two rounds, they assigned numbers to municipalities. But because of some of the criticism that I've just mentioned, they thought that, well, maybe we ought to not predict what the growth is going to be and effectively then create that growth potentially. But instead, let's see how the growth naturally occurs. And as that growth occurs, both residential growth and non-residential growth, a municipality will have a concurrent obligation to provide affordable housing units, or provide for the construction of affordable housing units, measured against the growth that was occurring. So it became what was known as the growth share methodology. And essentially, again, very complicated, but boiled down to its essence or simplicity. They said for every 10 residential units that would be built in a municipality had to create a realistic opportunity for one affordable unit. And for every 30 jobs that were created as a result of development taking place in a non-residential arena, one affordable housing obligation would be created. So they tied the affordable housing obligation to the growth that naturally was occurring. As soon as those regulations were adopted in 2004, they were immediately challenged. And they were immediately challenged by builders, but more importantly, by an organization that had evolved over the years, which then became known by 2004 as the Fair Share Housing Center, based down in Cherry Hill, And they brought an action challenging these regulations because the thought was that, well, now municipalities are going to stop any kind of affordable housing from being built in their municipalities, because if they had no growth, they'd have no obligation. And while that was true from the essence of the formula, the reality was municipalities had other interests as well. They had economic interests, they had obligations, they had to generate tax revenue. Many municipalities embraced growth, so they weren't going to have affordable housing obligation, the growth share, drive what they otherwise did. Their policies were not surrounded or created as a result of affordable housing. Affordable housing was simply a component of it. Municipalities looked at their futures not driven by affordable housing, but driven by a whole series of other factors, as they had done over many decades before that. Nonetheless, the regulations were challenged. And in 2007, the appellate division invalidated the regulations, sent them back to COA, sent COA back to the drawing boards to come up with new regulations, but they did not invalidate growth share. They had certain aspects of it that they were concerned about, and COA then created another iteration of growth share in 2008. Those were likewise subject to litigation. And in 2010, the appellate division upheld some of those revised regulations. That's the second iteration of the third round regulations. We had growth share, then we had the 2008 ones. The appellate division invalidated them. And by the way, the judge who invalidated those, who wrote the opinion, was one of the three Mount Laurel judges who was at the law division back in 1983, Judge Skillman, which was the one that the Morris County municipalities, among others in the northern part of the state, were before. He had been elevated to the appellate division, and he wrote the opinion. He found them invalid in certain ways, sent them back to COA, but said in his opinion, it's been now several decades since Mount Laurel 2, and certainly Mount Laurel 1. Maybe the Supreme Court ought to take another look at this. We're now decades later. Maybe it's time to have the court look at this again. So, but of course, he can't direct the Supreme Court to look at it. But of course, petitions were made to the Supreme Court from this case to appeal that case, that decision, and the Supreme Court took the case. And in 2013, they issued what's become known as Mount Laurel 4. And interestingly, Mount Laurel was not involved in the case as a named party, but they are forever going to be known for the doctrine. Mount Laurel 4, in Mount Laurel 4, the Supreme Court invalidated growth share. Okay, so all these regulations from 2004 to 2013 were variations of growth share. Supreme Court invalidated that and said, again, because the Supreme Court doesn't create regulations, they said COA has to follow the second round methodologies. You can't use growth share. You got to use this speculation as to, or projection of what growth is going to be, and so forth and so on. And COA went back and tried to do some regulations. There were some motions made because there were deadlines, and COA didn't meet the deadlines. And finally, they created the third iteration of the third round regulations. And the Supreme Court, through, again, a series of activities that we need not go into, set a deadline of October 22nd to adopt regulations. And on October 20th, 9 years ago today, which is sort of coincident, not sort of, it's coincidental, but ironic. 9 years ago today, COA sat down to adopt this new iteration of the third round, not having growth share. And now remember, they were supposed to have regulations in 1999. And this was now in 2014. So it was 15 years in the making, so to speak. COA sat down and deadlocked 3-3. So October 20th of 2014, 9 years ago today, COA was unable to adopt the regulations. That led to a motion being made to the Supreme Court by Fair Share Housing Center, and the Supreme Court deciding what some people call Mount Laurel 5, which was in 2015. And what the Supreme Court did then was to say, it's obvious that COA is non-functional, a moribund entity, and they're not doing their job. And we are now going to take all of these cases, and there were over 300 petitions filed with COA during this time period to get this substantive certification that were pending. We're going to take all those cases and give the municipalities we're going to take them away from COA, and we're going to give the municipalities an option. You do nothing, and you'll be subject to builder's remedy lawsuits, which still was around from 1983, or you file a declaratory judgment action, a DJ action, which some of you have heard before, and we'll have the court effectively do what COA did. And if you're successful in presenting this whole process, this housing element and fair share plan and so forth, we will give you a judgment of compliance and repose. And what that is the equivalent, the functional equivalent of substantive certification that COA would have given. But COA, we're not going to have anybody file anything before COA. Now, interestingly, the Fair Housing Act didn't change. It allowed COA to hear these things, but the court said, nope, we're going to pull those all away. So over 300 declaratory judgment actions were filed. Now, the court didn't do what it did in 1983, which was to appoint specific judges. Instead, what the court did was to just let the cases be filed in each vicinages. There's 15 vicinages in the state, composed of multiple counties, obviously. And we'll have those judges decide. So we'll have at least 15 different judges deciding these cases. So, and there are no regulations, but courts ought to follow the second round regulations. And remember, second round regulations were adopted in 1993. All right, the state was not the same in 1993 as it was in 2015. But of course, again, the court doesn't create regulations. So it had no choice but to say, go back, growth share was invalidated, go back to what's in the second round. And they also said, again, to their credit, well, you know, those specific aspects of those different iterations of the third round that were not specifically invalidated, judges should take that into account as well. So it was somewhat amorphous as to what was going on. So now these cases, we're back to 1975. All right, the court said in 1975, we don't want this. They finally got the legislature to move forward in 1985. And now in 2015, the court says, nah, this administrative agency is not working because they deadlocked, and enough's enough. We're going to take it back. So they took back exactly where we were and put us all back as to where we were in 1975. Applying 1993 regulations. So talk about a disjointed determination. Again, I'm not being critical of the court, but when you really look at it, what a mess. But of course, the court thought, oh, this will all work real well. You know, we'll go through this. Well, for those of you who have been involved in this, or your municipality has been involved in it, or you've heard about it, suffice it to say, it didn't go real well. And, you had 15 judges, again, not critical of the judges, 15 judges deciding these cases. Courts are not land use experts, and they're not supposed to be land use experts. They don't do regulations. They don't do zoning. They don't do all of that stuff. And yet now they were tasked with doing this with no methodology, no obligations established, no nothing. So courts decided, oh, we can't do this. So we're going to appoint special masters. So courts appointed special masters who were typically planners to assist the court in deciding these declaratory judgment cases where municipalities took what they had before COA and effectively put it before the court. And that went on and is still going on to date. What the Supreme Court did in 2015, in addition to taking everything back, they said that certain entities were going to be interested parties in every case. And one of them was Fair Share Housing Center. That's the advocacy group that sued back in 2004 to challenge the growth share third round regulations. They're going to be an interested party in every case. And what has evolved, and again, I no need to go through all of the details, the making of the sausage, but the sausage that has come out of this process is that the declaratory judgment actions are filed, a special master is appointed, and municipalities then deal with Fair Share, who, as the advocacy group for low and moderate income households, is viewed by the court as being a disinterested party who will ensure that these plans do in fact create a realistic opportunity. Whether that's true or not is, up to debate. Certainly that's their mission. But we are now in a position where municipalities typically enter into settlements with Fair Share, where these numbers are established, and then a satisfaction mechanism is set forth. And I'm going to end quickly here because I don't want to jump into Patrick's time. Because there were no numbers, there was nothing in 2015. There were a couple of these declaratory judgment cases that went to trial, and one of the things that had to be established was, well, what's the obligations? We don't know what the obligations are. So there was a case in Middlesex County decided by Judge Wolfson, pitted Fair Share experts against the municipality of South Brunswick experts, and as to what the methodology should be and what the numbers should be. And Judge Wolfson effectively accepted the Fair Share Housing Center's methodology and the testimony of their expert. And while he was only dealing with South Brunswick, that methodology then became a methodology that was sanctioned by at least one level of court at the law division. Those numbers that were produced from that methodology were significantly higher than one would think they ought to be. Again, depending upon, I suppose, the lens through which you view it. And 5 Mercer municipalities said, we're not going to accept those numbers. And that was the case that Bud had referred to, that I was involved with my now partner, actually. He was not my partner at the time, but Jeff Sereni and I tried the case for these 5 Mercer County municipalities before Judge Jacobson in the winter of 2017. We started, the first day of trial was postponed because there was a huge water main break in Trenton. So the courthouse was without water. So it was an ominous start to the trial. And we went for 41 days. And finally in June, it wasn't 41 consecutive days, but it was 41 days of testimony, examination, cross-examination. The judge, we finished in June of 2017. And almost a year later, 9 months later, I guess it was 9 months later, which maybe is prophetic as well, Judge Jacobson issued her opinion. And it was a 217-page, extremely comprehensive opinion. She was a great judge then. She's now retired, but she was intense and intent, conducted a very fair trial, and came down with a very reasoned opinion. By the way, she appointed her own special master to assist her in understanding the whole process. But the long and short of it was the numbers that she espoused in her opinion and the methodology that she established through taking the methodologies that were being proposed during the course of the trial resulted in cutting the numbers that had been established in Mercer County and Middlesex County for the state, cutting those numbers in half, just about in half. Now, not every municipality got half of the number, but overall, the need was reduced by 50%. And that methodology and that process became really the measuring stick for most settlements that took place. Not all of them, but most of the settlements that took place after that time were geared to satisfying the number that was produced by the Jacobson methodology, as opposed to the Wolfson methodology, which was the fair share methodology for the most part. Okay, lastly, where are we going? Well, all of these settlements end on July 1, 2025. So we have about a year and a half, I guess, or so, before any of these settlements or all these settlements become moot and invalid. So we're now going to have a fourth round. We have no agency. We have no nothing. So I suspect there's three options for the future. One is we do exactly what we did now, and that is we're going to have, you file a declaratory judgment action. You don't have numbers, so you're not sure how to, what to plug into your housing element and fair share plan without numbers. But you proceed through the court system as we're proceeding, and eventually judges will have a trial and experts will be presented and a methodology will perhaps evolve, although you still have these 15 judges dealing with it, not a single judge or a single entity. And the difficulty with that, just as an aside, is that the cost of these trials is stupendous. 5 Mercer County municipalities spent a boatload of money, particularly on the experts. Look, there were attorney's fees that were paid out, certainly, and those were not insubstantial. But the experts who charge, and again, not critically of them, because they are tremendously intelligent people who understand the complexities of this. Those numbers are $300, $400, $500 an hour. And there's 3, 4, or 5 people in these organizations who work on these things because they're just that complicated when you're talking about creating a methodology and an allocation method and so forth. A single municipality is just not going to be spending the kind of money that would need to be spent in order to defend itself. So it's going to become problematic from the municipal end if we continue to proceed in this direction. The second option is for the legislature to do something to create the methodology or create something more specific that can be implemented. But there doesn't seem to be an appetite in the legislature to do anything about this. Even from 2015, remember, that's when the courts took it back. The last one, and perhaps the one that's the best route from the municipal end, although not a panacea at all, is to have COA reconstituted, have the Council on Affordable Housing reconstituted. When the Supreme Court pulled all these cases from COA, they did not invalidate the Fair Housing Act. They did not invalidate the creation of COA and so forth. The problem is there are no members of COA. The terms have all expired, and there's just no functioning agency. So actually, Jeff Serenian and I were talking about this, and in 2021, I had offered the possibility of, why don't we try to get COA reestablished? Why don't we try to get them recreated? I did that at a League of Municipality session in 2021. And Jeff, who was not my partner again at the time, we talked about it, and he really picked up the gauntlet and thought, geez, that may not be a bad idea. And he, as Jeff does, went about very intensely trying to figure out how to do it. And ultimately, he put together a group of municipalities who filed an action to compel Governor Murphy to appoint members of COA so it can become a functioning agency again. That case was filed in 2022, as I recall, in the fall of 2022. It's filed directly with the appellate division, not with the law division, because it's an action against a state official, which is the governor. You can imagine the governor's reaction. They didn't sit down or lay down and play dead. So it's a hotly contested case because it gets into things of separation of powers and what a governor's powers are, executive powers are, and so forth. But anyway, that case is pending. It's been briefed. It's waiting to be heard by the appellate division. It's supposed to be fast tracked. There was a motion made by my now partner, Jeff Serenian, to either decide the case on the papers or to accelerate its determination. The court ruled on it and said, we're not going to decide on the papers, but we are going to accelerate it. That was back, I believe, in June or July of this year. So far, they have not had an oral argument date. But I have to say, and not because, he's my partner, but I think that the pursuit of that action, and hopefully the successful pursuit of that action, will be the best result for municipalities in dealing with affordable housing, because going back to the courts as we have been since 2015 is really not a viable option. It's going to be maybe the only option, but it's a very difficult one for municipalities. And I can't even think about what would actually happen during the course of the next 10 years from 2025 to 2035. Anyway, that's the history. So you've now gotten 50 years of history in an hour. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Ed. I appreciate it. Katie, if you could launch the poll.
Yep, I'm gonna throw up the first poll on affordable housing now. So you guys should see the question is, how is your municipality handling the administration of affordable housing units, rents up, sales? We got a couple options there. I'll leave this open for a minute, get your responses in, and then share the results. Thank you.
Ed, I certainly didn't know the history behind all of this. I mean, obviously being an auditor, I haven't lived it like town administrators, yourself, Patrick, CFOs have lived to, with this, including all the financing aspects as the CFOs have.
All right, you guys should see the results from that poll.
All right, split like pretty fair, pretty even overall. So I guess it's my turn. Mr. Buzak, thank you for the walk down history lane. The good news is that I'm done. All right, Ed took care of it.
You had the hard job.
It was good for Ed to go first, because I'll be honest with you, I'm a worker bee. I'm the everyday guy who comes to work as a municipal employee. I've had housing. I fell into housing 24 years ago. starting in some of the inner cities in Newark and Trenton, working for private management, dealing with the larger housing authorities, dealing with HUD, rolling into nonprofit work where I actually met Ed about 20 years ago. Then going into the municipal side, I've served on 2 different housing authorities. One was a development corp. So I just keep crossing it, and I guess it is what it is. And I certainly believe in it. I am not going to sit here and be able to explain to you the ins and outs like Ed is on the legal side. Not even on a planning side. It's complicated. You know, we have planners and professionals to help us as municipal employees because it is complicated. So we need help. I'm talking today from a perspective of the guy in the office who, kind of is, well, you're the go-to guy because, we don't know what to do with this right now, or where should we go? And governing bodies are made up of regular people like you and I, not necessarily professionals. So that was my background, just to see where I'm coming from. Our poll question we went through, and that's about right. Some towns are starting to switch to in-house, maybe a little bit more, based upon where we are with development and redevelopment in our modern. Over the last few years, we can all see residential units are going up everywhere, all over the place. And Ed made a very one-liner there that I remember from a decade ago. Municipalities can control your destiny. And we're at a point now where you can really sit with developers, where there was a fear at one time of those lawsuits coming in and the towns having no control and no say, and these massive, projects built, and, way too big for what the zoning called for at that time. I am seeing in my roles in I have a full-time town and a part-time town, which goes back to our first Comptroller discussion about being careful, working in multiple towns and covering yourself. I've been very fortunate. I'm approaching 20 years as a municipal full-time between 2 towns, and I've had a part-time town, which I'm going to focus a little bit more on in Wharton, for the last 18 years. John, who's on another call now, was the BA at the time, and hired me as a code enforcement guy, and it morphed into some other roles here with the affordable housing. So back in, I guess, around 2008 or so, the affordable housing liaison position was created by the state. They wanted municipalities to have a point of contact for the public. They wanted us to monitor the existing units that we knew were here. They had a relatively decent online reporting system that went in through the DCA, and you just kind of check the boxes on a monthly basis or a bi-monthly basis to ensure that development fees were coming and going. The development fee portion, we won't get too much into that, but that was a little bit of a, for any new construction, residential, commercial, there was a percentage collected at the beginning of the project. That money was taken, put into a trust fund. So at that point, we had our development fee trust funds, and the trust fund was meant to it had a few purposes. It was to provide the municipalities and developers with some financial assistance to spur development, be it just a nonprofit or a joint venture between a nonprofit and a municipality. Maybe it was a group home, or a single family home, rental, senior. There's a lot of different options based upon the needs of that municipality and what they had to address. And partnerships are really important. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that on the rehab side, because the municipalities were given a number of, all right, here's X units, how they get to it. As Ed said, there's a lot of different ways it could have been calculated, but if you had a number, you had a number, and that was the number that you, if agreed with it, were working towards. But you also had rehabs too. And rehabs are a very important part that I have tried to really focus on over my career. And the trust fund really helps the municipality fund rehab work in our existing housing stock. It's a you're investing in your residents, you're investing in your people in your municipality. So that trust fund money that comes in and out from developers and from new construction, different avenues. Not only can you take some of that money and you can pay down, and I think it's around it was 20% for professional services, being attorneys, planners, all very important components of figuring out where your town is going. But the other money can be used for buy downs, possibly, again, a partnership with an organization to build a home or a location. And the biggest challenge that I'm having is getting the municipal residents on board with our rehab programs. Now, the rehab programs, I've been successful in 2 to 3 municipalities in partnering with Habitat for Humanity. They have, we've had a great relationship for 16, 17 years in Wharton. In my town down here in Boonton, I've had them in here for a couple of years, and we're really starting to see a little bit of pickup. It's about the residents buying in. You know, they have to understand that there's funding available, and we want to make sure that we can, you know, keep our seniors and our lower income families in their homes. That's at the end of the day what a lot of this litigation for the last 4 decades is about. It's about opportunities. It's about, you know, creating opportunities and also keeping people in their homes. A lot of, so the roles have changed for as I mentioned, you know, I started out as like an inspector guy going out, and then the housing just sort of stuck, and here we are. So we have a second question. If you could throw that, Katie, if you could throw the second poll question up.
Sure. All right, just launched the second one, which is how many of you know what the current AH obligation for your own town is?
So the affordable housing, do you know what your number is as far as your municipality?
I'll leave it open and then share in a moment. Right. And you should see the responses. So it looks like most people do not know.
Okay.
Some do.
And you may not. It may not be under your umbrella, but we all have a number. It's either big, small, or in between. But the part now we are seeing, I think most of us in the state, certainly up in North Jersey and in the areas where we are, we're seeing a boom of residential development and redevelopment again. And that plays into small projects, medium-sized projects. We've got, you know, as little as, you know, say 12 up to 220 plus going on. Other towns have other larger scale projects coming in. So we're seeing this large push now of the creation of units, and it seems to be needed. They're all filling when they CO out. The units are filling up overnight. We have 12 units in a development here in Boonton. They just opened up the waiting list 6 days ago, and there's 500 people already. Okay, so that tells you that there's still a need. I personally have always pushed and lobbied with whatever governing body I might be with at the time, or whatever administrator I report to. At the end of the day, there's a need for affordable housing. Okay, there's a need here. Whether you believe in how it gets to that point or what the numbers should be, I leave that to the professionals to figure out. But there's obviously a need, and it's as simple as, you know, you like to get your cup of coffee in the morning, and you have the same woman who greets you every day, or you go to the, you know, the sandwich shop. These are our neighbors, these are our friends, these are our colleagues and people we know who maybe aren't making the money needed to buy a single family home at this time. and they fit the criteria for housing. These are our friends, our neighbors, and that's why I still lobby, no matter what a development may or may not be. If I can't get units, I'm always going to ask for some funding to go into the trust fund, because then that trust fund can go out and $20,000 might help 3 families get a new roof and windows and replace the heating system. And when that funding comes back in, say, 30 years, I take that same money and I go help another 3 families. So I'm a big pusher for money. I like the money because I feel I can help more in a bigger scale. However, units are important as well. In the borough of Wharton last year, the governing body and decided that they wanted to be a little bit more involved in the process. We had a 60 unit development go up right on Main Street there. And there was 3 units that were dedicated to affordable housing. And the administrator came to me and said, we're going to do it in-house. I said, well, okay. So right away, first thing Pat did was jump on the AA courses with Rutgers. Because I wanted to make sure that, we were following the proper procedure. And with the help of some professional colleagues, I'm 2 classes away from finally having that final certification. But we were able to do it in-house correctly. And I tell you, the importance of that was, and this is the towns buying in and showing their residents how to buy into this process, is that the day we had to do a lottery, because we of course had more qualified households than units for right now. So there was no questions. We had a full, transparent, taped lottery. We got the big machine. The balls were assigned, ping pong balls for everybody. We sat there, we rolled the wheel. My son, who's 12 or 11 at the time, pulled the ball, gave the ball to the chief of police, and the chief of police then called the number. And we really wanted to do it to be very open and clear and transparent, because there were so many people in need at the time. The best part of that story is, besides my son being there with me, was there was a woman in the front row, and she needed a 3-family, a 3-unit, a 3-bedroom apartment. She happened to be the one we called. She got up, ran out, and started crying. We thought something happened. We went out and checked on her. She says, "You called my name. You just changed my family's life." Okay. And to this day, she was able to complete the process. She got in there, and it was a real way of connecting with our residents and really showed the reason we do what we do. Some of us are called to this. Some of us just fell into it. I think I might be a little bit of both. But I'll tell you, I'm looking forward to doing it again. We have some more projects coming up. There's more building in both municipalities. And I really do enjoy what I'm doing. And I'm hoping that is shared with all of you, because it is important to all of us. And the last way, I'm going to tie up a little bit here. I don't have as much as Mr. Buzak had, but if you could throw that last poll question up, I think this will really be a little eye-opening for some of you.
Sure thing. Okay, the last question is up. It says, how many units are needed in New Jersey to address housing for the extremely low income renters? We've got a couple options there.
Now, keep in mind, this is only for one portion of our affordable groups. This is for the very low, extremely low.
Right, give it a minute and then I'll share. All right. Let's see the results now. Pretty varied. Looks like 250,000 is the majority there.
That's good. So the answer, I don't know if you can bring that up, but The answer is 224,531 units. So 225 is actually the answer. Again, that's for the very low income. The data came from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. So, you know, it's probably relatively close to where it should be. But again, that's one small portion of the need in this state. So to close, I just like to share that, you know, we as municipalities have the options to partner with developers now. I think there's more of an open door, let's talk policy in place between developers and municipalities. I think for a while there that those builders remedy lawsuits certainly scared a lot of public officials away from sitting down at a table and just having a conversation. At the end of the day, there's certainly nothing wrong in agreeing to disagree or trying to work something out. But I think it's very important that as we continue to grow, as we continue to develop and redevelop, we really need to keep these numbers in the back of our mind, as well as round, I don't even know what they've dubbed it now, round 4.10, whatever it might be. You know, it just changed so many times, but there's going to be a look again at what are you doing in your municipality to continue the smart growth as well as the growth needed for our residents in affordable housing. That's about it, guys. Not as long, but I just I thank you for having me here today, and I appreciate it.
Thanks, Patrick. Doug, I don't know if you're there, if you have anything with your experience to add.
Yeah, I'm still here. No, I think actually Ed covered it. It was kind of gone a little bit down memory lane with some of it because I got involved on Township Committee in 1989, right when we were dealing with our the first round of Mount Laurel affordable housing. So, and my former town attorney, and I believe Ed's former associate and law partner, John Jansen, was here for part of Ed's presentation. And yeah, it was, yeah, definitely it's a lot of stuff that's going on with this in the state, and we still haven't gotten our hands around it. So.
And Doug, is this primarily just a municipal issue? It's not necessarily a county issue?
No, not a county issue. County doesn't get involved. And unless it's obviously on the development's on a county road, but it does have county planning board approval, but for drainage and other issues like that, but there is no county involvement in the affordable housing obligation.
And that's part of the problem because, you know, you have a statewide obligation, it's then allocated to municipalities, and, you know, you have, I guess it's 564 now or 565 municipalities as opposed to 567, but you have 567 or 564 different municipalities trying to deal with the issue. And you really need to have, you know, an umbrella entity that deals with this, not 15 judges and not 15 different methodologies, because the methodology, you know, as Patrick's numbers point out, it's a statewide number, you know. So you need to look at it globally, so to speak, statewide, and you need some entity to do that. A municipality looks at it from the municipality's lens, and as they should. So it becomes a very difficult thing. And the other thing that I think is important is that these are all projections. You know, when they create these numbers, they're not creating the numbers based upon what's happening now. They are trying to predict for the next 10 years what's going to happen. And, you know, that it's done all the time. I get it. You know, it's not a foreign concept that you do that. But the truth is that they are projections. You know, people, and what I learned in the trial which was really eye-opening for me, dealing with these extremely intelligent, mathematicians and economists and real estate people, that when you mine the data that is out there, and my goodness, there is more data out there than you can imagine. Well, probably not. You've all dealt with it. The digital age has opened up stuff that was just not even available in 1975 or 1983 or any of the other landmark times. But there is so much data out there, and it's more easily found than it used to be because of the digital abilities. But what I found in the trial was that these experts look at the data, and there are literally hundreds of decisions that they make in what they pull out, what they exclude, whether they categorize this way or categorize that way, or look at this source of data instead of this source of data for the same information. And all of those data sources are different. So depending upon which one you use and what you pull out and what you don't pull out, the bottom line number is different. We had, during the course of the trial, we had two different experts on two different sides. Fair Share on one side, who has a mission and an objective, and the municipalities on the other side who likewise have a mission and an objective. In many cases, looking at the same data sources, the same databases, and coming up with different conclusions from it, because, and the reason they did that was they pulled out certain data, they disregarded certain data, and the basis for making those decisions were relatively rational decisions. They were reasonable. It wasn't that someone just pulled out numbers because, oh well, this was a higher number and that's what we're trying to achieve. It was, in some cases that happened, but in other cases it was just a legitimate, somebody's got to make the decision. So who makes it? It's the person who's mining the data. And now you get it. And if you don't know all the data that's out there, and no one knows all the data that's out there, it's very difficult to evaluate it. And you see a conclusion and it's supported, but what you don't know is what else is out there and what may undermine that conclusion. And that goes on both sides of the fence, no matter which way you're looking at it. So it's just a very, very difficult issue. And as someone said, there are no answers to these things. You deal with them, you come up with something, and you move on. But there's no panacea. There's no right answer to this. It's just a very thorny problem that's we've been dealing with for 5 decades now, and we're still trying to figure out what to do. But one other thing I want to add, and Patrick really made the point extremely well. What I forget about sometimes in this, as you probably could see from my presentation, is, but I try to remind myself of it, is that these are not numbers. They're numbers, but they're people. They're people that, like Patrick was talking about, they're people who need shelter. There are people who have circumstances, whatever they may be, and for whatever reason, that need shelter, that have families that are trying to do the right thing, which was the original problem with this. Not everyone, but it was thought that these are families that nobody does anything, nobody cares. They're not entitled to this. Well, that is just not the case. These low and moderate income households, and I've met them. I worked with Patrick with the Housing Partnership, and still am a member of the Housing Partnership in Morris County, and now has expanded its jurisdiction. They want what most of us want, and that is, a stable family, a good life, a place to live, a place to raise your family, a place to get involved in the community. And in many of the towns that I've represented, and because I've had this view from the beginning to now, I've seen an evolution of thinking where there was extreme resistance at the beginning to, reluctant acceptance to acceptance. But it really hit home when many of these public officials found that the children that they raised in their town could not live in the town once they got out into the world because they couldn't afford housing. And it really hit home, I think, for some people, and it really made the point better than anybody can that, as Patrick said, we need this. We need affordable housing, and the need far exceeds, no matter what numbers you use, no matter how you mine the data, we need more affordable housing. The challenge is developing a methodology that will maximize the number of affordable units that can be built without detrimentally affecting other aspects of quality of life for not only the people who live in the municipality now, but these new residents who come in, who, they benefit from everything that the municipality does as well. And they're part of that community. So it's a thorny problem, but as we said, you just keep working at it, and you're never going to solve it, but you're going to move forward. And Patrick's points were just really, it was a great way to end the affordable housing aspect of this. I learned a lot from all the other speakers as well, but that was a great way, Patrick, to end this. This was brought it home. So thank you.
There was one comment that came up in the question and answer box there. I'm just going to read through it, and I tend to agree with this as well. COA is a nightmare for all and the governing body who does not completely understand it. I completely agree with that statement. There are people who do understand it, but the vast majority of new governing body members do not understand it, and it should be something that's taught at some point as an introductory to becoming a governing body member. But I'll get off that soapbox in a minute. The governing body and residents are worried about schools, etc. And this person says, I believe water and sewer needs are not considered. So I don't know if anything like that is considered in with COA when those numbers are put together, and what the needs are for sewer and water as well, and if they're addressed.
I'll take a shot at that. The simple answer is no. In any of the methodologies that have been utilized, infrastructure issues are not part of the mix. Those become part of the mix afterwards. It's like after the horse is out of the barn, you then close the door. Again, whoever commented on this, is that point is well taken. It's not just building the units, and having builders to build the bricks and mortar, but it's all the utilities and the other things that you need in order to support that, and the need for educational facilities, for other services that are going to be impacted by the growth. And the other point I think that's important here is that most of the time these obligations are satisfied through inclusionary developments, which are higher density developments in which a portion of the units are set aside for low and moderate income households. And usually that percentage maxes out at 20%. Sometimes it's 15%, sometimes it's a little less. But it's the maximum is 20%, although you may get a couple, 22s or 23%. But the point is, it's not so much the 20% that creates the impact on the municipality. It's the other 80%, who are likewise residents of the municipality. So, there's a price to pay in terms of providing services and educational services are impacted particularly by that. When you have this, so you have these sort of competing goals and competing interests that you try to balance or mesh or work out in a way that makes some sense. And it's not an easy task.
I don't see any other questions or comments. Thank you both. Okay, John.
I just want to add one thing.
Thank you.
A few years back, one of my municipalities, who's may or may not be represented here today in attendance, we had an issue with COA because the CFO at the time was using more than, I believe it was a 10% allotment for administrative costs. You are allowed to spend the 10% on administrative according to the code, and they were going above and beyond that 10%. And again, I'm not blaming anybody or casting dispersions, but they were aware of this down at the state, and they knew that more than 10% was being spent. And they just kept calculating year after year the overage that the town was spending of COA dollars that were put aside incorrectly, rather than saying, hey, you guys need to stop doing that, or just to let you know, last year you were over your 10%. They let that number build and build and build until it became over $250,000. And then they asked for it all back all at once. And that's the kind of stuff that I think rubs some municipalities the wrong way. It was a mistake that was made that wasn't caught. But for them to have admitted to say, hey, we knew this was a problem year over year, but now we're asking you to pay up. I think that's kind of wrong. And we tried to do everything we can to go in there and make sure the numbers were correct and come up with solutions of how we were going to pay back that 250,000 plus, whether it was through a fair market value of a piece of property in town that was to be used for COA purposes. Any kind of option that we were putting out there was getting shot down, with the exception of, pay it in full. So I just want to put that out to make sure that CFOs are watching and monitoring and making sure that they're not spending over the allotted amount that they can spend with COA fees.
John, just to follow up on what you said, and just as an aside, so to speak, the present comptroller in the state was the former executive director of the Fair Share Housing Center.
Good to know. So I'm glad I brought that point up, even though it doesn't really have anything.
So am I. So I think, if he certainly understands all of that, and therefore maybe everybody ought to go back and check their figures.
Yeah.
And see what they have to do.
I hate to see it happen again. It will not happen again in that town, I can tell you that.
I'm sure it won't.
And I keep a close eye on my other municipalities as well, but that's not to say that it wouldn't happen here and there,
Okay, so thanks everyone. I know Katie's going to have some wrap up stuff. I just want to thank all of our presenters today. I thought the sessions were good, and I appreciate all of your time and effort. I think we're planning our next session, last one of this year, on Friday, December 8th. And tentatively, we're going to be talking about shared services. And Steve Oroho has agreed to present on the results of this year's election and how that's going to impact New Jersey. I think that'll be interesting. So Katie, you have some administrative stuff?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Bud. Thanks, everybody. Just a few follow-up things. Today's session was recorded, so we will send out the recording beginning of next week, and with a copy of the presentations, as long as the presenters are okay with it, and we only had a couple slides. But we'll send out the recording. And then lastly, there will be a survey that you'll need to complete for your credits that'll come up in the browser when the webinar ends. You could just fill that out, let us know what credits you need. Also, feedback, discussion topics. We're always looking for your input on those things. So, and if you don't fill it out now, we'll send that in the follow-up email as well, just so you make sure you get your right credits and all that. So with that, I think that covers everything. And thank you guys again. But if you want to close out or any other remarks.
Thank you.
I think I'm good. Thank you. John?
No, thank you again to all the presenters. Great topics today, great presenters. So we greatly appreciate it. And just have a nice, wet, rainy weekend in store. So enjoy.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Take
Have
care.
a good afternoon,
care.
everyone. Thank you. Take care.